Chapter 964. The grand and somewhat spacious hall was filled with dense darkness. The faint light flickered and shone in every corner. Darkness was like the main melody, bringing thick shadows one after another in the hall. The surrounding tall walls and pillars were engraved with dark-style reliefs. In the dim light, they looked especially gloomy and strange. At the end of the hall was a platform with steps piled up. The platform was not very big, but it was high enough. The platform faced the main door, and the scarlet red carpet extended all the way to the outside of the door. On both sides of the carpet, ancient and awe-inspiring armors, swords, and spears were placed every 10 meters. They were majestic, like guards, silently and resolutely guarding the hall. In the light and careful footsteps, he lowered his head and walked into the door of the hall with some fear but no hesitation. The dim light shone on his body, and the white suit on his body was illuminated with a faint blood color against the carpet. The handsome face that was completely taut because of nervousness seemed a little distorted in the dim light. He lowered his head and bent down, respectfully holding a box with both hands. He passed by one armor after another, and finally stopped in front of the scarlet carpet on the steps. He hesitated for a moment and did not choose to step on the steps. Instead, he bent down deeply in front of the steps and raised the square box that was not too big with both hands. On the platform above the steps, a cold female voice sounded, "Come up." The light in the hall was dim, and the highest platform was completely dark, without any light, as if it could devour everything. He held the box, his body trembled slightly. He gritted his teeth and carefully stepped on the steps. 13 steps. What an unlucky number. He thought silently, staring at the steps and carpet under his feet from beginning to end, and did not look up. The female voice in the darkness did not sound again. So he braced himself and walked forward. Stepping on the steps and walking forward for about 10 meters, he saw an extremely old bronze table. The pattern on the long metal table was blurred because of the lack of light. Behind the long table, a woman sat quietly on a long black chair. She could not see her figure, her face, her expression, and her age clearly. She could not see anything clearly. She was like the deepest darkness, quiet and soundless. His head was still lowered. From his point of view, he could only vaguely see a pair of fair and slender legs in the darkness. She only glanced at it unintentionally, and then lowered her head in fear. She maintained her posture of bending over, and once again raised the box in her hand. "What is it?" The emotionless female voice rang out in the darkness. "This is my gift to you." He maintained a humble posture as if he could crawl on the carpet at any time. The box was placed on a long bronze table. In the darkness, a slender yet excessively pale hand reached out and opened the box. He bowed his head and said nothing. There was a sudden silence in the darkness for a few seconds. "Milos!" There was no reaction of surprise. Instead, the female voice spoke with some astonishment. "Milos Pong Edwards, codenamed Death Penalty, the top expert of the half-step invincible realm, the chief executioner of the Jiang family of South America. He was the closest person to the real invincible realm in the dark world. He was like Di Jiang before the breakthrough, saint before the breakthrough, firmament of the Wang family of Beihai, military counselor of Emperor Dong's palace. Milos's strength was great. In a state of full outbreak, he could almost fight against an ordinary invincible realm expert in a short time. This state would not last long, about 20 seconds, but it was enough to make him one of the most dangerous people under the invincible realm in the dark world. And now, Milos, the chief executioner of the Jiang family of South America, with the codename Death Penalty, Jiang Guichu's right-hand man, and in charge of all things of the Jiang family of South America and Europe, was now in the box. There was some blood in the box. Milos's face was treated and looked clean and clear. This was a head. Milos's head. "Yes, I heard that he offended you verbally some time ago, so I think you will like this gift. Milos is planning a big action against the Dark Knights recently. He didn't say it clearly, but it should be aimed at all the peripheral forces of the Dark Knights in Europe. He also invited me, so he is here now." The woman in the darkness was silent for a while. "Very good. She said indifferently, "I like this gift very much. What's your name?" "Randa. Your Highness, my name is Randa. I have a second gift for you. That is myself and more than 70% of the assassin strength." The assassin. It sounded like a small, unfashionable organization. But in fact, it was the invincible realm force in the Dark World. It could even be said to be the youngest invincible realm force in the Dark World today, much younger than Emperor Dong's palace. They had only developed for about a few years. Many things had just taken shape, or even not. Speaking of foundation, they naturally didn't have it. In terms of scale, it was not a superpower. Everything was still developing. But now, they had no chance to continue to develop. The most important reason was that the leader of the invincible realm of the assassin died a few days ago. In Zhongzhou State, in Huading, he was killed by Dong Wang in one move. The assassin was a force of Zhu. If Zhu was still alive, they should still be working with the Jiang family of South America, the Holy Land, East Island, and His Majesty to prepare for the next decisive battle in Beihai. But with Zhu's death, the atmosphere inside the assassin suddenly changed completely. Their force had just started. Without Zhu, it would be difficult for them to protect themselves, let alone participate in the game at the level of Dong Wang and His Majesty. No matter how young the assassins were, they were still a force with invincible realm experts. When they lost their invincible realm experts and had not gained a firm foothold, there were too many people who wanted to devour them completely. Even in the eyes of the superpowers, the assassin had no foundation. The seemingly dry structure was not worthless. It also meant a huge force. Decisive battle? As soon as the news of Zhu's death spread inside the assassin, all the higher-ups in the assassin almost gave up the idea at the same time. They didn't even think about revenge for Zhu at all. They didn't discuss it at all. Revenge for Zhu? This was a complete joke inside the assassin. They didn't even dare to think about it, let alone do it. What they wanted to do most now was to protect themselves. So they refused some of the action requests put forward by the Jiang family of South America without hesitation. When Milos, the chief executioner of the Jiang family of South America, personally came to order them, there was almost no hesitation. The assassin became a real assassin on the spot. More than 10 senior assassins used various means to besiege him at all costs. After more than an hour of entanglement, they finally killed Milos, whose code name was Death Penalty. Then Randa, the strongest person inside the assassin, carried Milos' head and went directly to the headquarters of the Dark Knights to meet the Dark Queen of the Dark Knights. The Dark Queen was the new master of the Dark Knights. After the chaos in Snow Country, Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, had not been able to recover from his injury for more than 2 years. As soon as the Dark Queen appeared in Europe, she naturally took over the supreme power of the Dark Knights from Raphael. To this day, there were still many forces in the Dark World who didn't know the origin of the Dark Queen. If she hadn't shown the strength that was very close to the peak of the invincible realm, many forces would have even regarded her as the new invincible realm expert in the Dark World. But the identity of the Dark Queen was no longer a secret in front of the real superpowers. The Samsara Palace's position was the most vague and deeply hidden strongest supermaster, the lover of Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights. Sometimes she was a master of Samsara Palace, but most of the time she was Qin Weibai's personal bodyguard. Samsara Palace, Flaming Fire. The Samsara Palace had now been destroyed. With the last and most important main body, the Flourishing Age Fund, merged into Emperor Dong's palace, there was no trace of the Samsara Palace in the Dark World. Flaming Fire became the Dark Queen and controlled the Dark Knights. She became gloomier, more closed, and more indifferent than when she was in the Samsara Palace. She had only been in charge of the Dark Knights for a little more than a year, but in such a short period of time, she had personally carved countless eye-catching traces in the seemingly calm Europe, which was actually turbulent. At least in the land of Europe, her reputation had almost completely overshadowed that of the Queen of Shadows, King Tong, in her heyday. The Queen in the Dark was silent. She seemed to be thinking. Among the assassins, Randa, whose code name was Darkblade, was an expert who was very close to the half-step invincible realm. But at such a close distance, with the Queen's silence, he couldn't feel the existence of the other party at all in the dark. Darkblade's heart was a little cold, and his body bent more obviously. He was not only an expert who was close to the half-step invincible realm, he was also an assassin who was good at restraining his breath, hiding, and perception, and was close to the half-step invincible realm. But now, separated by a long bronze table, if he didn't look at the pair of beautiful long legs in the dark, he couldn't feel the existence of the other party at all. Like clouds and mist, it was an extremely illusory feeling. This feeling made Randa tremble from the bottom of his heart. This illusory feeling seemed to fully explain one thing. If the other party didn't control the Dark Knights, but became an assassin, she could definitely become the most terrifying assassin of the invincible realm in this era. Do you mean that the assassins are willing to submit to the Dark Knights? After a long silence, the Queen's light and emotionless voice sounded again. No, not to submit to the Dark Knights, but to you. The assassins are willing to be the sharp blade and loyal dog in your hands. If your will is for us to join the Dark Knights, we have no objection, but we still hope that we can have our own organization. Randa's voice was respectful and humble. Randa's voice was respectful and humble. Tell me your reasons. There seemed to be a touch of curiosity in the Queen's voice. Randa hesitated for a moment and finally decided to tell the truth. The assassins were promoted to a very high position, but they fell down. If the assassins want to survive, they can only rely on the real strong. You have many choices, the Queen said calmly. The Dark Knights are not the best. In fact, we don't have many choices, Randa smiled bitterly. In this case, whether we go to the Sanctuary, the Zhang family of South America, or East Island, the other party will regard us as cannon fodder in the final battle in Beihai. Our death is even worthless because from the beginning to the end, a considerable number of assassins think that the final battle in Beihai is meaningless to the assassins. Now that Zhu has fallen, we have no reason to go to Beihai to fight. We don't want to go to Beihai, which is empty now. Beihai is too chaotic now, and even if we are willing to join Beihai, I'm afraid Wang Shengxiao won't trust us easily. Emperor Dong's palace is a good choice, but His Majesty East Emperor has just killed Zhu. We don't dare to think about his attitude toward the assassins. Kunlun City is on the verge of collapse. It's also not our choice. Randa's smile was extremely bitter. So, the Dark Knights is our best, or even our only choice. Similarly, you used to be the super master of Samsara Palace. If we go to your side, even if His Majesty East Emperor will vent his anger on us because of Zhu, we won't see His Majesty's sword light under your command. His Majesty East Emperor, the Queen laughed. Her emotions grew stronger and stronger, and she became extremely sarcastic. What does East Emperor have to do with me? Just because I used to be the supermaster of Samsara Palace? Once. Randa lowered his head and said nothing. Why did Flaming Fire become the Dark Queen? It had always been a strange thing in the Dark World. It seemed that the Queen and Emperor Dong's palace had no connection, but the cooperation between the two sides in Wulan State had never been broken. Excluding the Flourishing Age Fund, the interests of Wulan State could now be said to be the main source of income for Emperor Dong's palace. After the chaos in Snow Country, Emperor Dong almost did whatever he wanted in Wulan State and occupied the biggest interests. After Emperor Dong's palace, the Dark Knights occupied the biggest interests in Wulan State. The cooperation between the two sides was extremely close in this regard. Even if the Dark Knights had robbed several interests that should have belonged to Emperor Dong's palace in the past 2 years, Emperor Dong did not say anything. After Emperor Dong returned to Tiannan, he also did not express any opinion about it. The outside world naturally could not figure out the relationship between the Queen and Emperor Dong, but one thing was certain. Randa firmly believed that joining the Dark Knights was the best choice and the best way to avoid Emperor Dong's anger in the future. His potential was limited and he had no hope of breaking through, but he was very clear about how to be a subordinate. Most of the time, when listening to a leader's speech, in fact, it was not necessary to listen to what he said. The most important thing was to listen to what he did not say. The queen's words were what made him feel that he had made the right choice. In the darkness, the queen seemed to be thinking about something quietly. After a few minutes, she slowly said, "How many assassins are there now?" "At present, there are 3 experts in the thunder-shocking realm. In addition to me, there is one at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and one in the thunder-shocking realm. There are 60 people in the fire-flaming realm. Among them, 20 are at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. There are about 6,000 combatants scattered in various places. Detailed assets have not been calculated yet." Randus said seriously. "You turn to me because you don't want to participate in the decisive battle in Beihai." The queen's gaze fell on him from the darkness. "Then what can you do for me if you surrender to me?" "No." Randa shook his head and said respectfully, "We just don't want to participate in the decisive battle in Beihai as cannon fodder. For assassins, what we need most now is to slowly develop and accumulate strength. So we think that the decisive battle in Beihai is meaningless to us. But if the queen asks us to participate, we won't hesitate. Your meaning is our meaning." "Huh." The queen chuckled softly. "Go to Annie," she said slowly. "He will arrange your position." Annie was her personal bodyguard. Strictly speaking, she did not belong to the Dark Knights. Since the assassins turned to her, the arrangement of the assassins naturally had to be handed over to Annie, not to the higher-ups of the Dark Knights. Randa nodded and bowed deeply to the queen in the darkness. Little by little, he walked backward down the steps and slowly walked out of the dark hall of the Dark Knights. The queen sat on the dark platform and watched his figure slowly disappear, leaving the hall completely. She took a deep breath and suddenly coughed violently. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted from her mouth and fell on the long bronze table and the bright red carpet in front of her. She was short of breath and curled up slightly. She looked extremely painful. In the darkness, there was a weak and pale face. Chapter 965. The severe pain lasted for a long time before it slowly subsided. On the platform where there was almost no light, the queen slowly straightened her body, and her breath had become extremely weak. There was silence in the dark hall. The armors on both sides of the carpet stood silently. In the box on the long table, Milo's head opened his eyes and looked at her quietly. The queen took a few deep breaths, wiped the blood from the corners of her mouth and the cold sweat on her forehead, and raised her head gently. The extremely illusory sword energy quietly covered Milo's head. The cold flesh and blood were quickly worn down and melted under the sword energy and finally disappeared. She really liked the gift that the assassin had given her. The Dark Knights and the Jiang family of South America had a very fierce conflict half a month ago. When all the forces in Europe received the news, the Queen of Dark took action in person, and Milos and another superior of the half-step invincible realm went all out. The battle was fierce and short. It lasted for dozens of seconds. Milos and another superior of the half-step invincible realm escaped with injuries. The Queen of Dark was unharmed. Such a record was naturally extremely powerful in the eyes of others who didn't know the details of the Queen. After all, Milos could be comparable to an ordinary superior of the invincible realm in a short time when he broke out with all his strength. The Queen could injure him and another superior of the half-step invincible realm, which meant that her strength was at least beyond the ordinary invincible realm. But in the eyes of the superpowers who knew that she was flaming fire, they could clearly see the weakness of the Queen of Dark. After all, at the end of the chaos in Snow Country, flaming fire showed the strength that was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. With such strength, if she were at the peak of flaming fire, not to mention dozens of seconds, in a few breaths, Milos and the superior of the half-step invincible realm with the code name Steelbone, who was good at defense, would be seriously injured. Whether they could survive depended on luck. But in this battle, although Milos and Steelbone were injured, they basically escaped unscathed. The fact that the Queen of Dark was not in good condition had become a fact in the eyes of other superpowers. Therefore, the Jiang family of South America and the Holy Land tacitly mobilized part of the forces in the northern part of the European continent and put this force into the decisive battle in Beihai. Only a small part of the force was left in the hinterland of the Dark Knights to restrain flaming fire. Among them, Milos and Steelbones were the leaders. The Queen of Darkness might not have a good impression of Dong Wang, but she was undoubtedly more annoyed by what the Sanctuary and the Jiang family of South America did. This also meant that in the eyes of the two superpowers, her value was equivalent to two top experts of the half-step invincible realm when she was not in her peak state. How could the proud and arrogant Queen of Darkness, who had always been by Qin Weibai's side, stand this? However, he could only suppress this anger in his heart for the time being and silently wait for the opportunity to get back at him. The assassin's gift made the queen feel much more comfortable. She sat quietly on the dark seat and waited until her breathing had completely stabilized before she slowly waved her hand. A faintly discernible wind appeared in the grand hall. With a faint sound, the door of the dark hall slowly closed in silence. The queen pressed a button under the bronze table in front of her. The long table moved to the left. Light shone from the ground. In front of the queen, a long passage that could allow one person to pass through appeared. The queen walked down in silence. The dark hall was the symbolic building of the Dark Knights. It was the palace of Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights. But in fact, the underground area was the place where the queen and Raphael lived daily. The orange light covered the long and dark corridor. The queen, who was dressed in a rose-colored dress, walked quietly. The soft light completely showed her exquisite figure. She seemed to be affected by the person she admired the most. Her temperament was also calm and cold. But even after 2 years, there was still a touch of helplessness and loneliness in the depths of her eyes that she couldn't adapt to. At the end of the corridor was a metal gate. The queen entered the password and verified her fingerprint. As the gate opened, what appeared in front of her was not a base full of cold mechanical style, but a living room decorated with warm and comfortable colors: sofa, coffee table, TV, kitchen, dining room, and bedroom. This was her and Raphael's home. She was willing to stay here, but she still felt a little regretful. The slight sound in the kitchen kept ringing. Opposite the leather sofa, the wide TV was on. As the top bigwigs of the European continent and the only couple in the invincible realm, the TV in their home was not playing any European news, nor was it a speech by a core politician. Instead, it was the stunning cartoon Tom and Jerry. The queen sat on the sofa and watched it quietly, her eyes in a trance. In fact, she didn't like watching cartoons very much, but this was her boss's favorite TV program. Every time she was tired or before making an important decision, she liked to watch it quietly for a while to relax herself. Over time, Flaming Fire had gradually gotten used to this feeling. Xiang'a, I made Zhongzhou cuisine today. I'm not very familiar with it, but it tastes good. Shall we try it? In some hearty laughter, the kitchen door was opened. Raphael, who looked younger than his actual age, walked out of the kitchen. His voice was warm and soft. He hadn't changed much from more than 2 years ago, but his handsome Eurasian face looked very pale and his breath was weak. But it seemed that because the queen was with him, he was in a good state of mind. The queen glanced at him and replied softly, the current Dark Queen, the former Flaming Fire, an expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm. Few people in the dark world knew her real name. Even few of the 12 supermasters of the Samsara Palace knew her real name. They only knew that she was from East Island. After following Qin Weibai, she had been called Flaming Fire. Gradually, Flaming Fire seemed to have become her real name instead of a code name. The queen herself was not even used to her real name, but only Raphael insisted on calling her that. He once jokingly said that only when he called her name could he be sure that she was his woman, not an invincible realm expert who was more powerful than him. The queen had a very nice name, but few people knew it. Wang Weixingge. This surname used to have a glorious history in the martial arts of East Island, but now it had become unimportant to the queen. The assassins contacted me. Wang Weixingge walked into the dining room and sat down. It seemed that he spoke casually. Raphael's movements paused slightly, and then he nodded thoughtfully. The small force set up by Ju, I've been paying attention to it in the past 2 years. Their organization is not big, and it doesn't involve a wide range of people. But the structure is very reasonable, and the quality of the personnel is not bad. At least in terms of setting up the assassins, Ju was very clear-headed at that time. He's clear-headed once in a while, but unfortunately, he's still an idiot. Wang Wexiange was a little disdainful. Raphael smiled and said softly, "Why did they contact you?" "To join me." She lowered her head and took a sip of soup. Then she said calmly, "I agreed to become a peripheral force of the Dark Knights." "Not bad." Raphael smiled and picked up her favorite mushrooms with his chopsticks. Even in the European continent, because of Wang Wexiange, they ate Chinese food most of the time, but Raphael rarely cooked in person. "They're very useful." Wang Wexiange raised her head and looked at Raphael seriously. Her eyes were clear and pure. "I plan to take action in the next few days and directly sweep out the power of the Jiang family of South America and the Holy Land." But the assassins took action first. They killed Milos as a sign of allegiance. And Ju has been cooperating with the Jiang family of South America and the Holy Land before. The assassins must know this information very well. The assassins said that they can participate in the decisive battle in Beihai, but I plan to keep them in the European continent. Although the assassins' overall strength is not strong, staying here can make up for the power of the Dark Knights to a great extent. Even if they can't complete the cleanup, they will definitely cause great losses to the Holy Land and the Jiang family of South America. These forces have completely gone crazy for Beihai, and the strength they have deployed in various places has reached the limit. Such a fragile balance can be broken by the assassins. So, she lowered her head to eat and said softly, "For the time being, with the assassins' participation, even if I'm not here, there will be no power in the European continent that can threaten the Dark Knights for the time being." Raphael looked at her quietly. "So you're going to Beihai?" Wang Wexiange was slightly stunned, and her eyes were complicated. She was silent for a long time before she said softly, "His state may not be as invincible as he shows. The decisive battle in Beihai is very critical and sensitive." She bit her lip. "I didn't continue to be the flaming fire of Emperor Dong's palace. Now, I can't just watch him die and ignore it. If even someone like Dong Wang could fall, then how useful can you be? You haven't recovered from your injury." Raphael shook his head. "I found a way to temporarily suppress the injury." Wang Wexiange said softly. In fact, the speculation of the outside world was not wrong, but it was not completely correct. She was indeed injured. But the injury she suffered in Mormons 2 years ago was not as serious as the outside world had speculated, because her injury in Mormons had been fully recovered about a year ago. It was at that time that she officially took over the Dark Knights and became the Queen of Darkness. Her current injury was a new one, a new injury caused by herself. Half a year ago, Flaming Fire forced a breakthrough and wanted to officially enter the peak of the Invincible Realm. But she failed at the most critical moment. This breakthrough brought her closer to the real peak of the Invincible Realm. But the forced breakthrough still caused a serious burden on her body. So in the conflict some time ago, she couldn't even do anything to the 2 half-step Invincible Realm experts. But now, she had found a way to keep herself in the peak state for the time being. Raphael sighed softly. "Are you angry?" Wang Wexiange smiled. "No, I'm just a little worried." Raphael shook his head. "How can the decisive battle in Beihai be so simple?" "It's okay," Wang Wexiange said softly. "In my peak state, no matter what, I can at least protect myself." "I'm afraid you'll be stupid." Raphael shook his head and put a black ring in Wang Wexiange's hand. "It can barely be used once," he said slowly. Wang Wexiange frowned and looked at the ring in her hand. This was the murderous weapon of the Dark Knights. Dark Saint's Spear. It had been less than 3 years since the chaos in Snow Country. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for the Dark Saint's Spear to be fired again. However, if the state of the murderous weapon was not taken into account, it could be used once. But after using it, the Dark Saint Spear would basically be in a half-useless state. Forcibly stimulating the energy of the murderous weapon was equivalent to directly hurting the core of the murderous weapon. It could be foreseen that once the Dark Saint Spear was fired in the decisive battle in Beihai, the gunshots of the Dark Saint Spear would not be heard again in the Dark World for at least a few decades. Thinking of the consequences, Wang Wuxiangu was a little annoyed. It doesn't matter. Raphael laughed. Even if the Dark Saint Spear is crippled, there's nothing to feel sorry about. When the time comes, we can just hand it over to Dongwang. It can make Wuqing more powerful. Moreover, with our friendship, I believe that the compensation he gives will be generous enough to make up for the loss of the Dark Saint Spear. He won't come to me. In fact, the Dark Saint Spear is a deterrent, but it can't control everything. If I'm in a better state, I want to go with you. Raphael shook his head with a wry smile. Wang Wuxiangu lowered her head and looked at the ring in her hand. After a long time, she put away the ring and said softly, "When I come back, we'll get married." Raphael was slightly stunned and then laughed. "I've been waiting for this day and this sentence for too long." A few years ago, Wang Wuxiangu had promised him that after they married, she would give birth to a child for him. Raphael touched his hair with some emotion and sighed. "If you had said that a few years later, I would have almost become the child's grandfather." Wang Wuxiangu blushed slightly and glared at him. Flaming Fire was 35 years old this year, while Raphael was 47 years old. In terms of age, Raphael, who was 12 years older than Wang Wuxiangu, really couldn't afford to wait. Wang Wuxiangu combed her hair and said softly, "Wait for me to come back." After the destruction of the Samsara Palace, she did not stay in Emperor Dong's palace. Even in the 2 years since she came to the Dark Knights, she had never contacted Emperor Dong's palace. But in any case, she couldn't just watch Li Tianlan be in danger and do nothing. During the time when she was delayed in the northern part of the European continent, she had been studying ways to suppress her injury. Originally, she had planned to forcibly suppress her injury and directly kill the forces of the Jiang family of South America and the Holy Land here. Then, she would let the Dark Knights shrink. She would go to Beihai and come back quickly. But now with the addition of the assassin, everything became very simple. She had to go to Beihai. A large part of the reason was because of the friendship between her and Qin Weibai, but also because of Li Tianlan. Wang Wuxiangu raised her hand. An extremely illusory sword light appeared on her fingertips. Real and illusory. Day and night. The martial arts of a chosen one. In fact, she was also qualified to be called saint. In terms of strength, she was even more qualified than saint, because like the current saint, she could become a superior of the invincible realm because she also learned Dongsheng Huangtu's kendo. She needed Li Tianlan's guidance when she was only a step away from the peak of the invincible realm. Chapter 966. Yunguang was the nearest county to the capital of Beijiang and also one of the largest encampments of the Beijiang army. Considering the environment of Beijiang, Yunguang was developing well. Besides paying attention to the stability of the situation in Beijiang, Jiangshan also paid close attention to the economic development. Yunguang was a county that he paid close attention to. In a meeting held in Yuzhou 2 years ago, Jiangshan personally negotiated an investment with the Hong family, which was also from the northwest. The scale of tens of billions was neither too big nor too small. However, for Yunguang, the effect of this investment was immediate. In the past 2 years, Yunguang had been developing very fast. If there was no accident, Yunguang would be officially connected with the capital city of Beijiang in 2 years. By then, Yunguang County would naturally become Yunguang District. A black car with an ordinary license plate was slowly driving at the junction of Yunguang and the capital city. Li Huaqing looked at the scene outside the window calmly. The temperature in Beijiang was not high, and it was extremely cold in winter. It was quiet outside the window. Only pieces of simple houses flashed in Li Huaqing's sight occasionally. "President, we are still making statistics. After this event, about 60,000 people will choose to settle down in Beijiang. Of course, this is not the final number. Beijiang will solve the problem of household registration for them. By then, I hope the police department can give some support to Beijiang." We will try our best to solve the supporting policies for their families. Of course, it will be better if the parliament can help. The chief lawyer of the parliament, Thomas, was driving. Jiang Shan and Li Huaqing were sitting in the back row. Following Li Huaqing's sight, Jiang Shan's steady voice sounded. Our preliminary plan is to build a town between Yunguang and the capital city. Well, not from scratch, but from the surrounding villages and the existing towns. The new town will be used to arrange the families who are willing to settle down here. If the town is developed smoothly, it can be connected with the capital city. In this way, the area of the capital city will be expanded by about 1/3, and Yunguang will also get better development opportunities. I've already held a meeting with the municipal government. They are relatively well off now, so they can carry out the merger and construction. The merger with Yunguang is the highlight of the work of the capital city in the next year. The newly established town will also become the core area of the capital city in Yunguang. There are many development opportunities and job opportunities here. Meanwhile, it can also solve the work problems of many families. If everything goes well, by next summer at the latest, this area will be completely connected to the capital, and the family members will be able to completely settle down here. Li Huaqing's expression was calm as he listened quietly. When Jiang Shan finished, he nodded and said, "Not bad." Li Huaqing arrived at Huading not long ago. This operation was very secretive. Beijiang did not publicize it. Only Jiang Shan came to pick him up in person. After getting off the plane and in the car, Li Huaqing directly asked to come here to have a look. Jiang Shan agreed without hesitation. Right now, only a small portion of the family members are living in simple houses. Most of them are concentrated in the barracks of the northern frontier military region. After all, it's more convenient over there. The logistics work hasn't been delayed, and there's still a good guarantee in terms of supplies. Li Huaqing nodded but still didn't speak. Their car had just driven over from the camp, so he naturally saw the current state of the family members. Jiang Shan also fell silent and didn't say anything. The atmosphere in the car was so oppressive that it almost froze. Ma Si pretended to be calm as she drove. Her palms were sweaty because she gripped the steering wheel too hard. At this moment, it was completely nonsense to say that he was not nervous. From the beginning, he didn't want Li Huaqing to come to Beijiang. In his opinion, this was completely risking himself. Jiang Shan's position was unclear. If he really committed treason, the consequences of Li Huaqing's trip would be really unpredictable. From a worse perspective, if Jiang Shan was really crazy enough to dare to attack Li Huaqing, then it would be almost impossible for Li Huaqing to leave Beijiang. As for the consequences, no matter what the consequences were for Jiang Shan, it had already happened. For people, even if all the Jiang family members were killed, it had little to do with him. Li Huaqing glanced at Ma Si intentionally or unintentionally, then turned his head, looked out of the window calmly, and said slowly, "Tell me what you think of the Beijiang army." Jiang Shan's eyebrows slightly trembled in an instant. Only those who knew him very well could see his movement. This was a sign that he was completely focused. For him, Li Huaqing's words were basically equivalent to a formal negotiation. The Beijiang army, he subconsciously sat up straight. After nearly half a minute of silence, he slowly said, "The overall strength of the army is now very serious. The main problem is the people's hearts. Guangtong has gone too far this time, and the chaos a few days ago has also caused great harm to many people's hearts. Of course, His Majesty's handling is very good. If he hadn't urgently executed those high-level officials, I'm afraid things would have developed to the point where no one could clean them up, and even brewed into a huge and tragic social problem. It's just that His Majesty Dong Huang is too decisive. The Beijiang army is now in a state of no high-level officials, and it's a mess inside. The only thing that can be maintained is the logistics. The work of rebuilding the army is very difficult. I plan to promote high-level officials from within the existing army. At least, no matter what, we should first stabilize the internal affairs of the army. At this time, the working ability can even be put aside, but those positions must be filled. You can rest assured about this, President. I'll focus part of my energy on the Beijiang army and keep an eye on them. After the internal affairs are stabilized, we also have to consider the problem of soldiers. The loss this time is not only the dead, but also a large number of people are ready to leave the army. The army must improve a series of benefits within the army, and then recruit soldiers from the outside world. The financial resources of Beijiang are limited. I've thought about it before, and the scale of the Beijiang army can't be too large. Now, I plan to recruit 150,000 to 200,000 soldiers from the outside world. Of course, these are all recruits, and it will take some time for them to have combat effectiveness, and 150,000 to 200,000? Li Huacheng directly interrupted Jiang Shan's words. Ma Si quickly glanced at Jiang Shan through the rearview mirror, as if she was looking at a madman. The Beijiang army was not a large-scale army in Zhongzhou State, let alone compared with the Border Control Corps. Even in its heyday, its total scale was less than 200,000 or even 150,000. Jiang Shan needed 200,000 soldiers for a single recruitment. This also meant that there were nearly 300,000 soldiers in the entire Beijiang at once, including the soldiers who stayed behind. 300,000. What did he want to do? The most important thing was that he told the plan without reservation. Jiang Shan looked at Li Huacheng and calmly said, This time, he simply omitted the previous number and nodded, saying, 200,000. You really have a good appetite. Li Huacheng smiled. His smile was calm and indifferent, but it carried a touch of coldness and sharpness that was hard to fathom. If the northern frontier recruited 200,000 soldiers, then there are at least 300,000 soldiers here. Tell me, what do you plan to do with these 300,000 soldiers? Who are they going to fight against? Jiang Shan took a deep breath and said calmly, These 300,000 soldiers are the power that I think can stabilize the situation in Beijiang. No matter now or in the future, their only responsibility is to protect Zhongzhou State, to protect Beijiang. Li Huacheng looked at him for a long time. You're much more clear-headed than I thought. He smiled faintly. I thought you would only say to protect Beijiang, or put Beijiang before Zhongzhou State. If that's the case, then there's no need for us to talk, right? Jiang Shan also showed a smile. After all, Li Huacheng was the commander. Beijiang was the Beijiang of Zhongzhou State. If he had just answered that he would protect Beijiang instead of Zhongzhou State, or that he would protect Beijiang first and then Zhongzhou State, Li Huacheng might not have said anything. But after he went back, the entire Beijiang would be in a desperate situation. Jiang Shan did not want to commit treason, and he had never thought about it. So he would figure out the seemingly meaningless, but actually the most important primary and secondary. Li Huacheng's smile remained unchanged, and he did not comment. I have a question, Jiang Shan suddenly said. Go ahead. Li Huacheng's voice was calm. How many people know that the president is coming to Beijiang? Jiang Shan's voice was a little playful. Not many, Li Huacheng said with a smile. Minister Dongsheng, Deputy Minister Yi, and Minister Zhou. Only these people know. Dongsheng Wudi, Yi Dongsheng, and Zhou Yinhai. The three of them represented three different groups. The Prince Group did not know, nor did the Special Warfare Group. The president is very thoughtful, Jiang Shan said softly. He knew very well how important the three people in the know were. Once something happened to Li Huacheng in Beijiang, Dongsheng Wudi could make the decision. Countless artillery fire would destroy everything of the Jiang family in an instant. In the face of the overall strength of a country, especially the overall strength of a super overlord like Zhongzhou State, nothing could survive the artillery fire. This was the most powerful warning. At present, I'm not disappointed in Beijiang, nor in you. Jiang Shan, I'm here today to give you a chance, and also the last chance for Beijiang. I'm waiting for your answer as to where you and Beijiang should go. The vehicle approached the downtown area. Ma Si changed the direction under the navigation and drove to the villa of the Jiang family in the suburbs. Tell me, who's behind you? Li Huacheng's voice was steady and dignified. I still say the same thing. Jiang Shan said slowly. The Jiang family has never turned to any force, let alone to the so-called foreign force. We only have ourselves. His voice was serious and serious. President, you'll see the answer, a satisfactory answer. I can guarantee that your trip to Beijiang today is absolutely worthwhile. Li Huaqing laughed. The black car slowly drove into the villa area and stopped in front of a villa in the central area. A figure shrouded in starlight and clouds was already standing there quietly. Li Huaqing couldn't see his face, but he could clearly feel the bright smile on the other side. Jiang Shan got out of the car first and opened the door for Li Huaqing instead of Ma Si. The figure at the door of the villa walked over steadily. Li Huaqing got out of the car and looked at the warm starlight and clouds in front of him, frowning slightly. If it's the confidence and strength of the Jiang family. Jiang Shan looked at the figure standing in front of Li Huaqing, who seemed to be composed of countless halos, and laughed. He is the confidence and strength of the Jiang family. The starlight was dim. The clouds surged. The soft light swayed slightly in front of Li Huaqing, getting fainter and fainter. Li Huaqing's eyes became more and more astonished, and his eyes became bigger and bigger. A familiar, extremely young face appeared in front of him and Ma Si. The starlight and clouds completely disappeared. His smile was bright. "Hello, Mr. President. I'm Jiang Shangyu." After a pause, he said with a smile, "You can also call me Your Majesty." Chapter 967. Direct, obvious, and honest. Before coming here, Li Huaqing had imagined many scenarios. He didn't completely believe that Jiang Shan hadn't turned to any forces, so even on the way, he was still wondering who he would meet here. Jiang Shan could invite him to Beijiang for a secret inspection. Naturally, it was not to show off, and he did not have the guts. If the other party wanted to assassinate the president, it was even more impossible. Therefore, compared to Ma Si's worries, Li Huaqing was more curious. He was very sure that since Jiang Shan had invited him to Beijiang, he would definitely be able to see something and meet someone. But he didn't know who he would meet. He was fully prepared and felt that it wouldn't be strange to see anyone. If it weren't for the foreign forces, he might have met Shan Fangqing, Gu Xingyun, or even Zhou Yinhai or Li Tianlan. If he exaggerated a little more, even if he saw Wang Tianzong here, he would feel that it was understandable. But he didn't. No one. Li Huaqing had never thought that he would see Jiang Shangyu here. In other words, he didn't expect to see Jiang Shangyu, who called himself His Majesty, here. Was this the confidence of the Jiang family? Li Huaqing stood in front of the car and did not speak for a long time. Countless intense emotions surged wildly in his heart. Shock, astonishment, disbelief, and finally, they turned into some kind of relief. Many of the things he couldn't figure out before seemed to have an explanation. For example, Jiang Shangyu had made continuous breakthroughs overnight. For example, he suddenly turned against Kunlun City. But as some things were explained, more doubts arose. His thoughts kept fluctuating. Li Huaqing was still calm on the surface. He looked at Jiang Shangyu with deep eyes, with obvious majesty and oppression. Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Huaqing with a smile, neither backing down nor dodging. "Your Majesty," after a long time, Li Huaqing slowly repeated this phrase. The Sword Emperor of Beihai, the East Emperor of Tianan, and Jiang Shangyu in front of him. The word His Majesty had never been bestowed upon so many people in any era. At least in the past few hundred years, there were only two forces that could have the Emperor of the Dark World. One was the Wang family of Beihai. The other was the Li family. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and asked, "Was it you who challenged Li Tianlan and Tianan last night?" "It's me." Jiang Shangyu nodded without hiding anything. "What's the reason?" Li Huaqing asked in a deep voice. "There are too many reasons," Jiang Shangyu said blandly. "To put it bluntly, he is not my friend, so he can only be my enemy." In the cold air, his smile was as bright as the sun. "President, please come in. We can have a good chat today. I'll accompany Deputy Ma for a walk. There are a lot of things to deal with in the northern borderline. I'll communicate with Deputy Ma about a lot of things, and Deputy Ma will relay them to you later." Jiang Shan looked at Li Huaqing and suddenly said with a smile. Ma Si finally came back to her senses. Her expression changed, and she wanted to say something but stopped. Jiang Shangyu was the emperor. He was now the third majesty of the Dark World. This identity represented too many things. To be honest, Ma Si didn't want to hear what Li Huaqing would talk to the president at all, but he was worried about Li Huaqing's safety. He stood there, hesitating. All right. Li Huaqing took a deep look at Jiang Shan and responded simply. From Jiang Shan's attitude, Li Huaqing could be sure of one thing. In today's Jiang family, Jiang Shan had given most of the power to his son. When he didn't know Jiang Shangyu's identity behind the scenes, who would have thought that he would come to northern borderline to talk to the Jiang family and talk to Jiang Shangyu instead of Jiang Shan? Jiang Shangyu led the way in front, and Li Huaqing walked into the villa unhurriedly. The door was closed. It was quiet. The faint fragrance of tea floated gently in the hall. Li Huaqing sat on the sofa with a calm expression and looked at Jiang Shangyu. It said that this is your favorite Longjing. Jiang Shangyu smiled and poured a cup of tea for Li Huaqing. The water in northern borderline is clear and sweet. The taste of this tea should be better than the one you drink in Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing took the teacup and put it in front of him. He looked at Jiang Shangyu thoughtfully. You ask, and I'll answer. Jiang Shangyu calmly changed the honorific to a simple you. Li Huaqing wasn't surprised by his attitude, but it was obvious that he still didn't understand what he saw. He unconsciously picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. After a long time, he slowly asked, How did you do it? Jiang Shangyu was a little confused. I've specially learned some information about martial arts. How did you achieve this kind of strength? It's almost certain that although you're a few years older than Li Tianlan, your body shouldn't be able to withstand the power of the invincible realm at all. But your attack in Tianan has proved that you have the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm. How did you do it? Is it important? Jiang Shangyu said casually, My state is a little special. You can even understand that I haven't entered the invincible realm yet. I can only exert the power beyond the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan can do this, and I'm no worse than anyone else. Why can't I do it? If you have this kind of strength, why has the Jiang family been in a bad situation all these years? Li Huaqing shook his head subconsciously. It's not easy for me to get to this point. It wasn't until recently that I had enough strength and bargaining chips. Li Huaqing's voice became calmer and calmer. He said calmly, Let's talk about the bargaining chips in your hand. The most obvious one is wealth. Jiang Shangyu said calmly, Although the Jiang family doesn't have many industries at present, we are not short of money at the critical moment. It can be seen from the pension this time. Over the years, the Jiang family can get tens or even hundreds of times of every investment. You may not believe it, but if we compare the investment income of the Jiang family with the superficial income of the Flourishing Age Fund, our income rate is higher than that of the Flourishing Age Fund. It's just that we don't have much capital, so we can't reach the scale of the Flourishing Age Fund. The superficial income of the Flourishing Age Fund? Li Huaqing subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Don't doubt my words. After all, only the enemy will rack his brains to understand the enemy. According to my understanding, what the Flourishing Age Fund shows now is definitely not their complete scale. Although the Samsara Palace was destroyed, the main body of the Samsara Palace didn't suffer much damage. Their main body should be the Flourishing Age Fund. What the Flourishing Age Fund has exposed now is probably only 1/3 of their total scale, no more than half at most. Jiang Shangyu said calmly. What about you? Li Huaqing asked. How much have you exposed? How much have you hidden? So far, I haven't exposed anything. Jiang Shangyu said with a smile, but in front of the president, I'm willing to be honest for once. He opened a drawer and took out a folder that was stuffed full. The current industry situation of the Jiang family is here. In fact, my father is right. The Jiang family has never betrayed Zhongzhou State from beginning to end. You said that we turned to foreign forces, East Island, the Jiang family of South America, the Holy Land, any force. This is not accurate. Jiang Shangyu said calmly. To be precise, these foreign forces turned to me. And today, Jiang Shangyu stared into Li Huaqing's eyes and said word by word, With all the bargaining chips of our Jiang family, we plan to turn to you. Chapter 968. The so-called heartbeat was an irresistible feeling. It was like staying at home and suddenly someone knocked on your door with a lot of money. It was like walking on the street and suddenly there were countless beautiful girls who wanted to be your girlfriend. It was like unable to resist, even if he knew there would be a trap. Li Huacheng felt the same way. The Jiang family wanted to take all its chips to the academics. Even if Li Huacheng was a fool, he knew what this meant. As a supergroup that occupied the president's position, the academics was not strong most of the time compared with the Southeast group and the Prince group. The reason why the academics could get to where they were today was largely because of Li Huacheng's wisdom. Before Li Huacheng became a director of Zhongzhou State, although the academics was also one of the six, its overall scale was even less than that of the North group. It was a miracle that he could become the president of Zhongzhou State. It had a short development time, no foundation, no strong connections, no support from the top class, and no experts. This was the current situation of the academics. In recent years, the academics had developed rapidly and could vaguely compare with the Southeast group and the Prince group. Especially in the game of the past 2 years, as the Southeast group and the Giant group reshuffled, the academics had gained a lot of benefits from it. But the main reason for all this was that Li Huacheng was the president. If he were to step down from this position, the academics would not have the strength to replace his position. This also meant that the academics could at most have 1 or 2 directors, and the major groups would also join forces to squeeze the academics' living space in order to have a greater say. At that time, the strength of the entire academics would continue to be lost. In their current state, their scale might be only a little larger than the North group. This was an unavoidable rule for any group. The rapid development after getting this position and the suppression after losing this position. The six had all encountered such a situation. The only difference was that giants like the Southeast group and the Prince group, even if they were squeezed early, they could have more chips to balance the deal and would suffer less loss. The academics did not have such chips at present. Although Li Huacheng would still be re-elected this year, he had a plan for 5 years later. If Jiang Shangyu really took refuge with the academics, Li Huacheng's eyes became extremely deep in an instant. Jiang Shangyu pushed the folder in front of him toward Li Huacheng. Li Huacheng watched this scene quietly. For a moment, he felt that the folder was shining with a light that he couldn't look at directly. This is an obvious benefit. If Jiang Shangyu turned to the academics, what benefits would the academics get? The term rely on was very interesting. Not cooperation, not allies. Seek refuge. The Jiang family of South America, Knights Templars, and Jifeng sword training school turned to Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu turned to the academics. This also meant that as long as the academics accepted Jiang Shangyu, it was equal to accepting the foreign network behind Jiang Shangyu. If these hidden pawns played well, they could often play a role that could not be ignored in the deadlock of international games. This meant that these forces would become the peripheral forces of Zhongzhou State. Strictly speaking, they were the peripheral forces of the academics. The Jiang family of South America was a superpower. Even if the Divine Sanctum left the sanctuary, it could still be considered a first-tier force like the Jifeng sword training school. The Southeast group had the Wang family of Beihai, whose network was all over the world. Now, the academics only needed to accept Jiang Shangyu, and the disadvantages in this regard could be greatly made up. Secondly, it was the secret industry of the Jiang family. Li Huacheng didn't know how many secret industries the Jiang family had now, but these could be regarded as the overall strength of the academics. The importance of money to a group was self-evident. Behind every group, there was incomparably strong capital support. Otherwise, the Flourishing Age Fund would not have developed to this extent. And if they accepted Jiang Shangyu, the shortcoming of the academics without experts would immediately disappear. Jiang Shangyu, who called himself His Majesty, was even a super expert who could fight against Li Tianlan at this stage. The lack of their own experts had always been a pain in the heart of the academics. There was no need to say more about the Southeast group. With the Wang family of Beihai, their experts had always stood at the peak of the Dark World. The Prince group also had the support of the Special Warfare group. Even though the relationship between Gu Xingyun and them had gradually drifted apart over the years, the two sides always had the same general position. And before the appearance of Li Tianlan, Mount Shu could also be regarded as the power of the Prince Group. Even the giant group had Jade Pool behind it, which had produced several experts of the invincible realm. Only the academics could not produce decent experts. Without experts, it meant that it was difficult for the academics to intervene in the affairs of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. It also meant that they had given up the interests of the Dark World. The Wang family of Beihai was stabilizing its internal affairs. Emperor Dong's palace was rooted in Tiannan. Gu Xingyun was now caught in the storm of treason, and his prestige was ruined. He had no time to take care of himself. At this time, if the academics could get a super expert who could rival Li Tianlan, Li Huacheng, who occupied the position of president, could make Jiang Shangyu the new god of war of Zhongzhou State after Gu Xingyan. And with the existence of Jiang Shangyu, the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace could be more balanced. This choice was undoubtedly much better than choosing Lin Yuxian. After all, even if Lin Yuxian's position was not mentioned, at least Zhongzhou State still needed to wait for Lin Yuxian's growth. Similarly, as the Jiang family turned to the academics, Beijiang would also become the academics' possession. As a senior member, Jiang Shan could also bring great help to the academics. All of them were benefits. The benefits that were enough to drive people crazy were completely placed in front of Li Huacheng with Jiang Shangyu's words. "Turn to me." Li Huacheng was silent for nearly 5 minutes before he said in a low voice, "I have never heard of His Majesty who turned to others. That's because they don't need it." Jiang Shangyu said blandly, "The Wang family of Beihai has His Majesty. They are powerful and have everything they want. They don't need to turn to others at all. In terms of their foundation, they can cooperate with anyone at most. What they protect is their own country. Emperor Dong's palace also has His Majesty, but what is the prerequisite for Li Tianlan to become His Majesty? It is Li Honghe and the Dongqing clan who created Tiannan. It is his personal strength, the unreserved support of Samsara Palace, and the rich flourishing age fund. The Jiang family doesn't have these things. The so-called His Majesty can only be an empty shell. Except for my own combat capability, I have nothing that can compare with Emperor Dong's palace, let alone the Wang family of Beihai. If I want to survive, I can only turn to the academics." Li Huacheng leaned on the sofa, looked at Jiang Shangyu's expressionless face, and said slowly, "What do you want?" "I don't want anything." Jiang Shangyu laughed. "The Jiang family doesn't want to be a dog at others' feet, nor do we want to be cannon fodder." Li Huacheng gently tapped the armrest of the sofa and understood what Jiang Shangyu meant. They didn't want to be a dog or cannon fodder. He looked at this sentence from another angle. That was, Jiang Shangyu wanted to be on the same side as the academics. "Tell me about your plan." Li Huacheng was noncommittal. After the final battle in Beihai, Li Tianlan is very likely to die. My force will officially appear in Beijiang, and the Jiang family will officially appear in front of everyone. In Beijiang, in order to dispel other people's doubts, I hope the academics can nominate the new commander of the Beijiang Legion. In addition, I hope my father can still stay in Beijiang. The nomination of the commander of the Beijiang Legion by Li Huacheng was tantamount to announcing the close relationship between the Jiang family and the academics to the outside world. Letting Jiang Shan stay in Beijiang would undoubtedly further stabilize the situation. Li Huacheng took a deep look at Jiang Shangyu. The meaning of this sentence was equally clear. Beijiang could belong to Zhongzhou State or the academics, but it must belong to the Jiang family. Okay, he nodded. Jiang Shangyu also nodded and didn't speak. This seemed to be his only request. It was almost no request. Li Huacheng took a deep breath, stood up, and took the initiative to reach out his hand. "Then, the academics welcome you, Your Majesty Jiang Shangyu." He agreed to join the Jiang family. From the beginning to the end, he did not mention the final battle in Beihai, nor did he mention the appointment with Li Tianlan 3 days later. "Thank you." Jiang Shangyu smiled and reached out his hand. "President, do you like the great mountains and rivers in Beijiang?" At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Li Huacheng finally walked out of the villa. Jiang Shangyu personally sent him out of the villa. The two said goodbye in front of the door and shook hands vigorously. Ma Si, who had received the news 10 minutes in advance, drove the car over and opened the door for Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing got into the car, rolled down the window, and waved to Jiang Shan and Jiang Shangyu, who were standing quietly outside the window. Then, the car started and slowly headed for the airport. Except for him and Jiang Shangyu, no one knew what they had talked about in nearly 4 hours and what kind of deal they had reached. Ma Si wanted to say something, but stopped several times. In the end, he didn't say anything. He actually wanted to know the content of the conversation between the president and Jiang Shangyu, but he was very clear that it was not necessarily a good thing for him to know these things. "How was your chat with Jiang Shan?" Li Huaqing seemed to be in a good mood. He glanced at Ma Si and asked with a smile. "We had a good chat. We had a good chat." Ma Si laughed. "Huh?" Li Huaqing shook his head with a smile. "What did you talk about?" Ma Si drove the car, thought about it seriously, and said dumbly, "In fact, we didn't talk about anything." This inconsistent answer was actually not contradictory at all. One was the chief secretary of Zhongzhou State, and the other was a senior member of Zhongzhou State. Both of them could be said to be wily old foxes. When they sat together, there would naturally be no awkward silence, but they were absolutely adept at playing the official tone. They had a good chat, but even if they had a good chat for a day, they could have a good chat without saying anything substantive. Li Huaqing shook his head with a smile and did not speak. Ma Si thought about it and suddenly said, "However, Speaker Jiang Shan seems to be very concerned about the future of Beijiang and hopes that we can support it." In addition, he also mentioned some policies of Zhongzhou State in recent years and expressed a lot of opinions. Li Huaqing paused and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. Then he nodded and said calmly, "We should still support the northern borderline. The northern borderline army is a little sensitive now. After we go back, we need to choose a real, capable general from within to be the northern borderline army's commander." Internally, Ma Si turned her head and looked at Li Huaqing in astonishment. There were two meanings in this. One was the internal of Zhongzhou State, and the other was the internal of the academics. If it was the former, Li Huaqing didn't need to tell him. This also meant that, would the academics take this extremely sensitive position? Li Huaqing nodded with a smile. "You have been with me for many years. After the election, come down and have a look. Just come here and preside over the provincial government of Beijiang. Jiang Shan will support you." Ma Si's arm shook, and he couldn't come to his senses for a while. He had been with Li Huaqing for more than 10 years. At the level of governor, if he was demoted, he would at least be a border governor. People like him would generally have one or two better places to go. The best was naturally to be demoted to a remote and backward province and directly serve as a speaker. But such cases were rare. The second was to be demoted to various departments directly under Zhongzhou State as a minister or the first deputy minister. Now, Li Huaqing meant to let him be the governor of Beijiang. Although Beijiang was a little backward compared with Wuyue and Nanyue, it was the largest province in Zhongzhou State. The speaker had always been a member of parliament. There was no doubt that the governor of Beijiang was valuable. This could be said to be the best place for him. "President." Ma Si's voice was a little hesitant. Li Huaqing glanced at him and nodded. "From now on, the Jiang family is one of us." Ma Si took a deep breath subconsciously, and countless emotions kept rolling in his heart. The Jiang family was one of us. This news shocked him even more than Jiang Shangyu calling himself His Majesty. "Don't feel wronged when you come to Beijiang. 5 years later, I will retire. At that time, Jiang Shangyu will probably be able to initially control Beijiang, and Jiang Shan will also let go of this place. At that time, the academics will fully support Jiang Shan to further become a director, and you will be the most powerful candidate for the Speaker of Beijiang." Li Huaqing's voice was flat. Ma Si drove the car and was silent for a long time. If this was part of the deal, he pondered and gradually frowned. "President," he whispered, "the Jiang family's ambition seems to be a little too big." "Man?" Li Huaqing shook his head. "Man's ambition is endless, but the most rational careerist always understands what he really needs. But there are always some people who have the ability, strength, means, and wisdom. But such people never really get what they want, so they will become very confused. They will instinctively want more, even want everything. He does have the ability, but he doesn't realize that his ability is great, but his ambition is greater, which is beyond his ability. Everyone will have such a situation, and the key lies in their own choice. For example, the original Wang family of Beihai, for hundreds of years from the beginning to the present, the Wang family of Beihai has always wanted Beihai. Another example is the current Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan may not understand this at the beginning, but Samsara Palace and Li Honghe are sober enough, so they want Tiannan. The former is using the resources of Zhongzhou State to feed Beihai, and the latter is using the resources of Zhongzhou State to develop Tiannan, so they are cancer. They are ambitious, but they are also rational enough. Li Huaqing's voice contained countless sighs. What about Jiang Shangyu? He wants to use Beijiang to seek the whole Zhongzhou State, not to use Zhongzhou State to develop Beijiang. His choice seems to be similar to that of the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace, but in fact, it is completely different. He is a madman. He may think he is very sober, but in fact, he is crazy. I agree to let them join the academics and become one of us, but I can never let him hand over the future of Zhongzhou State and the academics to such a person. So I will show some attitude, but I can never give him too much support. The car drove slowly on the road. Li Huaqing looked at Beijiang outside the window and chuckled. The great mountains and rivers of Zhongzhou State. Do you deserve it? Chapter 9:69. The river was surging, and the wind and snow were howling. In the gloomy night, the lights of the city gradually lit up. The traffic was moving on the street. Looking down from a high place, the few pedestrians were like small black spots on the road. The wind and snow were swirling through the window. He stood in the luxury suite on the top floor of the hotel, and his eyes fell on the island in the center of the river. The exquisite island was still lit, but it was no longer brightly lit as it used to be. The lights flickered slightly in the darkness and the wind and snow, and some sparsely shone on the lake and the river. He looked at it silently and did not move for a long time. Such a Beihai. In the voice with a faint smile, Jianghua, the current patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, came over with 2 glasses of red wine. He handed one of them to him and sighed softly. Such a Beihai really deserves the title of the strongest force in the dark world. In terms of history, the history of the Jiang family of South America is longer than that of Beihai. To be honest, I used to be unconvinced of you. I always thought you were a group of nouveau riche praised by Zhongzhou State. You had the strongest sword emperor, the strongest murderous weapon, the freest system. All this was just good luck. In fact, at that time, I knew very well that the Jiang family of South America was not as good as you, but I was unconvinced. It was a very strange mentality, right? Jiang Guochu shook the wine glass in his hand with a smile and looked at the brightly lit city under his feet. This is my first time to Beihai. Such a Beihai is really prosperous and desolate. Wang Xiaoyao held the glass and commented faintly. Jiang Guochu raised his eyebrows and seemed to be a little confused. When I was young, I learned the saber from an old man on that island. Wang Xiaoyao whispered. Jiang Guochu said thoughtfully, Heaven Saber DK, the strongest expert of the Wang family of Beihai in the past generations, was the peak expert of swordsmanship, but Wang Xiaoyao was an anomaly. Since he was a child, he had been learning the saber. The Jiang family of South America naturally had information in this regard, but it was not very detailed. Yes, Wang Xiaoyao whispered. After the old master died in Li Tianlan's hands, the Kanglin Jiang family began to decline. Now, he shook his head and said, Beihai is indeed very prosperous, but the soul of Beihai is Mount Dibbing, and the core is the 7 sword-holding families. According to the intelligence, my good nephew has moved all the important figures of the 7 sword-holding families out of Beihai province, and even some important figures of Mount Dibbing are no longer in Beihai. Now those who are left are the combatants of Mount Dibbing and the sword-holding family. This is undoubtedly the worst plan. This Beihai has lost most of its soul and core. It looks prosperous on the surface, but in fact, it is desolate. There was an elusive emotion in Wang Xiaoyao's voice. Do you mean that Wang Shengxiao's decision is stupid? Jiang Guochu laughed. Incorrigible stupidity. Wang Xiaoyao said flatly, it's simply superfluous. If North Sea is gone, what's the use of those who left North Sea? Such behavior, other than lowering our own morale, it won't have any positive effect. However, this is a good thing for us. Indeed. Jiang Guochu took a sip of red wine and said with a smile, in all of our eyes, Wang Shengxiao is still too young. In the case of Sword Emperor Silence, you are the most suitable candidate to be the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. What a coincidence, I think so too. Wang Xiaoyao raised his glass and gently touched Jiang Guochu's glass. The two looked at each other and smiled. In an invisible tacit understanding, Wang Xiaoyao said slowly, I hope we can cooperate happily in the future. Although the alliance established by the Jiang family was still in a hidden state, the contact between several superpowers had become more and more frequent. If everything went well, after the final battle of Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao would become the new patriarch of Beihai. With the resources and foundation of Beihai, most of the superpowers needed them. The Jiang family of South America also urgently needed some of the technologies of the Wang family of Beihai in some fields. Similarly, Wang Xiaoyao also needed the superpowers. The alliance of the Jiang family did not have a clear superior and subordinate relationship, but was purely bound by interests. As long as the interests were large enough, the alliance between multiple parties was unbreakable. How is South America? Wang Xiaoyao asked suddenly, playing with the red wine glass in his hand. Still in a stalemate. Jiang Guochu shook his head. But Lin Fengting has appeared in South America. It's certain that he won't appear in the final battle of Beihai. After all, South America is my base camp. We're still sure that we can contain him there. Wang Xiaoyao was silent for a while, then took a deep breath and said, if Lin Fengting doesn't come, our pressure will be much less. That's true, but the European continent. Jiang Guochu gritted his teeth, and his face became a little gloomy. Milos, the top expert of the half-step invincible realm of the Jiang family of South America, who could even be said to have the combat capability of the invincible realm, died in the European continent. It could be said that it was the biggest loss of the Jiang family of South America since it participated in the final battle of Beihai. The chief executioner of the Jiang family of South America could almost be said to be Jiang Guochu's real right-hand man. Every time Jiang Guochu thought of it, he felt a pain from the bottom of his heart. With the death of Milos, the news that the assassin had turned to the Dark Knights had spread in the European continent. The Dark Knights were still very quiet, but the situation in the whole European continent had become more and more tense. They all knew the identity of the Dark Queen. So once the stalemate in the European continent was broken, the Dark Queen's position didn't need to be considered at all. She was also an expert close to the peak of the invincible realm. If she could spare some time to rush to Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace could be said to have an extremely powerful reinforcement out of thin air. Flaming fire. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were a little complicated. He seemed to remember the days when he used to crazily pursue Qin Weibai, but got no response. A trace of extremely powerless bitterness flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then he slowly shook his head. It's too late. Flaming fire can't get here in time. The Dark Knights suffered heavy losses in the chaos of Snow Country. The addition of an assassin won't have a big impact. If Flaming Fire wants to take action, she must act quickly and get rid of the power of the Jiang family of South America, the Holy Land, and Snow Country. She was originally injured. Even if she could take action, it would take time. But she has no time. Jiang Guochu narrowed his eyes and nodded gently. 2 more days. 2 days later, it was the time for the battle between His Majesty and Li Tianlan. This battle was bound to attract the attention of the whole dark world. And 2 days later, it would also be the time when they officially provoked the final battle of Beihai. Chapter 970. No matter how turbulent the outside world was, the inside of Emperor Dong's palace was always calm and peaceful. Today's Emperor Dong's palace seemed to have an extremely stable and majestic aura, just like the Wang family of Beihai before. That kind of confidence quietly affected everyone in Emperor Dong's palace. The mysterious expert's challenge to Li Tianlan continued to ferment in the dark world. In just one day, it had attracted the close attention of countless forces in the dark world. Both the superpowers and the medium and large forces in the dark world were silently analyzing the possible results of this battle and nervously preparing for the upcoming drastic changes in the dark world. But inside Emperor Dong's palace, it was calm as if nothing had happened. The specific form of this calmness was that most of the higher-ups in Emperor Dong's palace were busy with their own affairs. Except for the initial shock and astonishment, Emperor Dong's palace quickly calmed down, as if everyone had absolute confidence in Li Tianlan. So far, no one had expressed any opinion about this battle. Not to mention worry, they didn't even mock the mysterious expert. This time, it had attracted the attention of the dark world, but inside the Emperor Dong's palace, it seemed to be completely ignored. As one of the most important and core higher-ups in Emperor Dong's palace, Military Counselor couldn't understand the current mentality of Emperor Dong's palace. His position was completely different from Saint's. When Samsara Palace existed, Saint was the main combat force of Samsara Palace, but the master of Samsara Palace regarded him as one of the most important supporting forces for Li Tianlan in the future. Therefore, Saint was not responsible for anything in Samsara Palace, only the necessary battles. Military Counselor was a comprehensive talent who controlled most of the affairs of Samsara Palace. He controlled the wealth, resources, and intelligence of different channels of Samsara Palace. He was the general manager who managed most of the affairs of Samsara Palace. As for the future of Emperor Dong's palace, the master of Samsara Palace didn't arrange any specific position for him, which was equivalent to leaving him a way out. Military Counselor had always been different from Saint. Saint was a top-notch combat talent. Because of his relationship with Samsara Palace, Li Tianlan could trust him completely and even give him the position of Deputy Palace Master. But a management talent like Military Counselor was different, especially a management talent like Military Counselor who was similar to an overview of the overall situation. His position was too sensitive. The master of Samsara Palace could trust Military Counselor completely, but it didn't mean that Li Tianlan could trust him completely. Even if he could trust him, there was still the problem of whether he could be used conveniently. Therefore, in the original plan, when Samsara Palace was destroyed and Emperor Dong's palace rose, Military Counselor could withdraw from the core position of Emperor Dong's palace with a small part of the shares of the Flourishing Age Fund, and then slowly fade the traces of his existence. Of course, if Li Tianlan trusted him enough and he was willing to stay, he could continue to lead the Flourishing Age Fund. It all depended on Li Tianlan's attitude and Military Counselor's own choice. Military Counselor had never known Dongxing Huang Tu. He knew of this person's existence, but he had no interest in understanding, learning, or using him for reference. His martial arts talent and age were not enough for him to enter the Invincible Realm. Half-step Invincible Realm was his limit. He didn't want to learn the martial arts and sword energy of the so-called Chosen One, nor did he bother to think about how great the dynasty after Samsara Palace would be. All his thoughts were on the development of Samsara Palace, and all his loyalty was to the master of Samsara Palace. He didn't know Dongshang Huangtu, which meant that he didn't know Li Tianlan. The scenery after the Invincible Realm was extremely strange to him. The strength after the peak of the Invincible Realm had become very vague to him. Therefore, when a mysterious expert who had surpassed the peak of the Invincible Realm personally delivered the letter of challenge to Li Tianlan, it was really hard for him to understand how the whole Emperor Dong's palace could completely ignore him. This kind of detached mentality, which regarded the heroes of the world as nonentities, made Military Counselor instinctively feel a little uneasy. He might not know much about the ultimate martial arts of this era, but at least he could know that Li Tianlan hadn't really set foot in that supreme realm. At most, he had broken through the peak of the invincible realm. Facing the challenge of a super expert in the same realm, the whole Emperor Dawn's palace seemed to have underestimated the enemy. Was he arrogant? Was he arrogant? Military counselor hesitated for a day and finally found Saint on the evening of the second day after the letter of challenge was issued. He still didn't want to communicate with Li Tianlan directly about many things. He would avoid it if he could. It was the same to find Saint and ask him to help him convey his attitude. After returning to Emperor Dawn's palace, Saint had been staying in his room. When military counselor opened the door, invisible sword energy was spreading in the room. The space kept shaking and twisting in front of military counselor, and finally formed a delicate balance. Saint, who was a little pale, was staring at the middle point of the space distortion. He frowned tightly, and his eyes were solemn and serious. Military counselor stood at the door and frowned, but he didn't want to leave. Military counselor glanced at him and gently flicked his fingers. The constantly spreading sword energy in the room slowly shrank. Then, the whole twisted space seemed to be slowly smoothed out by an invisible hand. Saint, who was a little pale, slowly exhaled. He picked up the water glass in front of him and drank some water. Then he asked casually, "What's wrong? You don't look right." Military counselor walked into the room, took out a cigarette, and threw it to Saint. "Is your injury worse?" "No." Saint smiled, lit the cigarette, took a deep drag, and said slowly, "I'm a little exhausted. I'll be fine after a night's rest." Military counselor nodded, smoking absent-mindedly, and didn't speak for a while. "You came to me just to smoke? Afraid of being discovered by Xinyan?" Saint glanced at him and joked. "Xinyan follows His Majesty all the time. As her father, I have to put her in second place." Military counselor shook his head with a bitter smile. He hesitated and said slowly, "Did His Majesty go to the city hall today?" "He came back after lunch. Mayor Ning is very capable, and there's not much for His Majesty to worry about in the city hall." Military counselor said, "What about now?" "He should be talking to Du Hanin and Su Chu. They will secretly leave Beihai tonight and go to East Island. The new Nightmare Army has begun to gather people. If everything goes well, I'll set off tomorrow afternoon." Saint glanced at him. "Tomorrow afternoon? To East Island?" Military counselor frowned. Saint nodded. "Do you have a different opinion?" "The day after tomorrow, Jiang Shangyu will challenge His Majesty. Are you going to East Island tomorrow?" Military counselor said in a deep voice. "Yeah." Saint smiled. Looking at military counselor's expression, he seemed to understand something. "There's nothing to worry about." "Why? Are you worried that His Majesty will lose? He's not really invincible yet. Aren't you worried at all?" Military counselor took a deep breath and asked slowly. "He can do it." Saint said blandly, "His Majesty can't lose." In other words, Jiang Shangyu has no chance. No chance, no chance at all. By being ruthless? Military counselor smiled with a complicated expression. "No, by His Majesty himself." Military counselor seemed to think of something, and his eyes became a little strange. "To tell you the truth, I was a little worried before this noon. But after noon, I found how ridiculous my worries were. All of us don't understand His Majesty's power at all." "What do you mean?" Military counselor raised his eyebrows. "When His Majesty returned from the city hall this afternoon," Saint hesitated for a moment. He seemed to be a little embarrassed and didn't know how to describe it. "Well, we had a friendly match with His Majesty." "Spar? You?" Military counselor's voice sounded a little strange. "Me, Situ, Sanyue, Lin Yuxian, Li Beitian, and Bai Yuming." Saint sounded a little annoyed. The five of them could be said to be the strongest fighting force in Emperor Dong's palace, except for Li Tianlan. 2 were in the invincible realm, and 2 were in the half-step invincible realm. Li Beitian, who had the lowest realm, also had the strength of the half-step invincible realm. "It's not a tag-team battle," Saint said hoarsely, 5 against 1. What was the result? The military counselor's voice became more and more strange. The result? Saint sounded like he was having a toothache. 1 minute and 30 seconds. The 5 of us were defeated. The military counselor let out a long "oh." He was silent for a moment before he slowly said, "So, Do you think the five of you can rival Jiang Shangyu? Is that why you're not worried about the outcome of the battle? Of course not. Saint lowered his head and took a deep drag on his cigarette. His voice was in a trance, as if he was telling a nightmare. The key is that in the friendly match just now, His Majesty suppressed his strength to the thunder-shocking realm, not even the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The five of us faced His Majesty of the thunder-shocking realm, and we were defeated in 1 minute and 30 seconds. Chapter 971. Military Counselor didn't speak for 5 or 6 minutes. Saint sat opposite him and finished smoking the cigarette in his hand. He put out the cigarette, and looked at Military Counselor silently, without speaking. Thunder-shocking realm. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Complete defeat. These words were very common when they appeared alone, but together they brought an indescribable horror. Military Counselor couldn't believe it. He even thought he had heard it wrong. Thunder-shocking realm? Military Counselor asked again, as if to confirm. Thunder-shocking realm. Saint nodded seriously. To be exact, this should be the state when His Majesty broke through to the thunder-shocking realm for the first time. His aura was unstable, and there was still the aura of the fire-flaming realm. But even so, we still lost. Military Counselor's pupils dilated slightly. He opened his eyes and subconsciously raised his tone. How is this possible? You have 2 invincible realm experts, not to mention others. You and Situ Songyue are 2 invincible realm experts. If His Majesty suppresses his strength to the thunder-shocking realm, he can't even break your defense. How'd you lose? The corner of Saint's mouth twitched fiercely. Although the voice in his heart told him again and again that it was not shameful to lose to Li Tianlan, he still felt a little shameful when he thought of the scene a few hours ago. Saint didn't think he had to be invincible in the world. It was not that he couldn't lose, nor that he couldn't afford to lose. But losing in that way really made him feel a little ashamed. The problem is defense. So you mean that your in situ, Songyue's defense, didn't resist His Majesty's attack? Military Counselor seemed to have heard a joke and laughed. When did the defense level of the invincible realm become so bad? No matter how strong His Majesty is, he only has the power of the thunder-shocking realm. Strictly speaking, His Majesty, who just entered the thunder-shocking realm, has almost reached the level of the half-step invincible realm. Saint glanced at him discontentedly. But Situ, Songyue, and I joined hands, and Lin Yu Xian and others assisted us. His Majesty did not break our defense, but it was precisely because he did not break our defense that we lost. Otherwise, even if we lost, it shouldn't be so ugly. What do you mean? Military Counselor frowned and felt a little confused. Saint picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. His eyes were a little dazed, and he muttered to himself, "Too fast." The corner of the military advisor's mouth twitched. He said helplessly, "Can't you be more specific? There's no way to go into details. I don't know what to say either." Saint tried hard to think about the incredible fight not long ago. He spoke very slowly. Anyway, the moment His Majesty attacked, we subconsciously made a defensive move. After that, we no longer had the chance to attack. We kept defending, and after more than a minute, all of us used up our stamina and even reached a state of exhaustion. That was the end of the sparring session. Obviously, he didn't want to continue this topic and shook his head fiercely. We are not sure what the real perfect state of the Chosen One is. It was mentioned in the notes that the Palace Master gave me, but it was not clear. The time from Wang Tianzong's breakthrough to his termination was too short, so it was difficult to have a clear conclusion. Now, apart from Wang Tianzong, in terms of combat capability, His Majesty is undoubtedly the person closest to that level, and his physical state is too perfect. Whether it's strength or speed, relative to his physical strength, he has almost no flaws in all aspects, so there's no need to worry about Jiang Shangyu's challenge at all. I even think that if His Majesty goes all out, Jiang Shangyu won't even have a chance to resist. That's too exaggerated. Military advisor shook his head. I guess only Emperor Dawn's palace is so optimistic in the whole dark world. After the news of Jiang Shangyu's challenge to His Majesty spread, in such a short time, more than 40 second-class forces in the Dark World have accepted the employment of the Jiang family of South America, Knights Templars, and East Island respectively, planning to directly participate in the final battle in Beihai. And this news was released a few hours ago. You should know what it means. The news of the final battle in Beihai didn't just appear in recent days. It had been brewing in the Dark World for a long time. It was only with the increasingly obvious actions of several superpowers that Beihai received more and more attention. Several superpowers have been secretly recruiting troops or hiring some other forces to go all out to invade Beihai. According to the information that military advisor had, before Jiang Shangyu challenged Li Tianlan, all the second-class forces hired by the superpowers added up. There were less than 20 of them. But since the challenge, more than 40 second-class forces were willing to join the final battle in Beihai. Jiang Shangyu's appearance undoubtedly greatly stimulated the confidence of many forces in the Dark World. This kind of employment at the level of the final battle often represented great benefits, and Jiang Shangyu's appearance also gave them the hope of victory. Many forces expressed their positions, which undoubtedly meant that they put their chips on the joint forces of Jiang Shangyu. In other words, they all agreed that Beihai and Emperor Dawn's palace would fail in the final battle. Second-class forces in the Dark World. It didn't sound like much. The level of the superpowers didn't have a more authoritative confirmation, but there were some things that everyone in the Dark World recognized. For example, the Wang family of Beihai, the Zhang family of South America, the Shadow Throne, the Holy Land, and the Mecha Alliance and the Heroes Club that once existed. They had a long history and deep foundation. They had invincible realm experts, murderous weapons, and an unbreakable base camp as their foundation. Such forces were recognized as superpowers in the Dark World. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital that first appeared in East Island more than 5 years ago and the current Emperor Dawn's palace could barely be regarded as one of the superpowers. The two might not be traditional superpowers, but what they had in common was that the leaders of the two superpowers were extremely strong, and they were not afraid of the real superpowers. The former Samsara Palace, Kunlun City, Jifeng Sword Raining School, Wuji Palace, Sai City, Burning Legion. Such forces were recognized as first-class forces in the Dark World. They might not have enough foundation, a short history, a weak leader, and all kinds of shortcomings, but there would at least be one invincible realm expert in a first-class force. Because of this, the Assassin Association, which had only begun to develop in recent years, could also be regarded as a first-class force. Several superpowers and a few first-class forces formed the top class of the Dark World. After that were the second-class forces. The super-large mercenary corps, the large private armed forces with complex components, and the killer organizations whose business scope covered the world could all be regarded as second-class forces and the backbone of the Dark World. This kind of force might not have top invincible realm experts, but there were always experts in the fire-flaming realm, the thunder-shocking realm, and even a half-step invincible realm. 40 second-class forces accepted the employment of the coalition led by Jiang Shangyu. If they were willing to do their best, it would be a huge force that no one could ignore. In the whole Dark World, there were not many second-class forces that could be recognized by everyone. 40 was almost the vast majority of them. Saint frowned slightly and kept silent for a long time. Do you still remember 2 years ago? His voice was a little low. Military counselor raised his eyebrows, glanced at him, and said nothing. At that time, the Samsara Palace judged most of the invincible realm experts in the whole Dark World. After the trial day, we ended Wang Tianzong and brought a new era. Saint smiled. What if we win this time? Most of the forces in the Dark World, he said softly. If we win this time, we will judge the whole Dark World. In a new era, there will inevitably be a new dynasty. I'm ready. Chapter 972. Legislation. Looking at Ning Qiansheng sitting opposite him, Li Tianlan's tone was a little stunned. We've discussed it internally. Everyone has always thought that it's time. As if he had been prepared, Ning Qiansheng took out a thick stack of documents from his bag and handed them to Li Tianlan. Take a look at these. If you have no objections, I will personally go to Yuzhou to communicate with Guo Wentian. Li Tianlan silently looked at the documents in Ning Qiansheng's hand and then at his own palm. He held a spicy duck head in his palm. Without disposable gloves, his fingers were all stained with oil. He was silent for a while before asking in confusion, "What are you doing here today?" "Drinking." Ning Qiansheng answered matter-of-factly. There were 7 or 8 exquisite side dishes in front of them, and a bottle of Maotai had been half empty. The scene in front of them was definitely not a report. When the two brothers were chatting, they talked about the future direction of Tiannan. On a whim, Ning Qiansheng directly took out the documents that were strictly speaking not fully prepared from his bag. "Now that we've talked about it, you should also take a look. This is one of the most important tasks in Xianyuan City in the next 3 years." Li Tianlan got rid of the duck head in his hand, wiped his hands, took the documents, and glanced at them. The dense, small words on the documents made him dizzy, as if he had drunk too much. He shook his head and put the documents aside. "How many people are there in Xianyuan City now? Is it necessary to make laws at this time? I originally planned to wait until after the election, when everything would be settled and there would be more room for maneuver. But now it seems that we can do it a little earlier. The battle in North Sea is a key. After the battle, we can use your influence to promote the legislation in Xianyuan City." Ning Qiansheng took a sip of wine and clicked his tongue. How can it be so easy to make laws? Councillor Guo Wentian of the National Assembly is one of the leaders of the Prince Group. It's not easy to get through him. This matter must have the support of the Assembly, at least the majority support. Xianyuan City needs our own laws. It seems easy to make laws, but the difficult part is to continuously revise and improve the laws after they appear. With repeated improvements, the legal system in Tiannan can slowly mature. This requires a process. Now it seems that there is indeed no need for Xianyuan City to pass laws in a hurry, but they had to prepare for a rainy day. By the time Xianyuan City and even the entire Tiannan City needs laws, our laws will be relatively mature. Otherwise, if we rush to legislate at that time, Tiannan will be in chaos for a period of time, and the development of the entire Emperor Dong's palace will be slowed down. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and looked at the information beside him. "Which step are you ready to take now? The City Hall has reached a consensus. In addition, we've greeted some people in Zhongzhou State. We've sent invitations to the top judges, lawyers, scholars, and professors in Zhongzhou State, and the feedback is good. If Emperor Dong's palace can support it, the City Hall will set up a team in a short time. Xiaoming will be in charge of the specific work, and I'll be in charge of the external affairs." From the very beginning, the system of Xianyuan City was essentially different from that of Zhongzhou State. There was no Speaker of Parliament here. The one with the highest power was the mayor. Below the mayor were the chief executive officer and the chief judge. The current chief judge of Xianyuan City, Lan Xiaoming, was the person he personally asked for from the Zhongzhou State Police Department a year ago, and it was Zhou Yuanshan who strongly recommended him. It was Lan Xiaoming's proposal that Xianyuan City prepared to legislate a few years earlier. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. He picked up the information beside him and looked at it. He nodded and said, "It's ready. Let me know if there's anything I need to do." "Actually, there is." Ning Qiansheng laughed. "I'll go to Yuzhou to set up a team and communicate with Guo Wentian. But I hope you can bring up the matter of Xianyuan City's legislation in the parliament. This matter must be high profile." "No problem." Li Tianlan nodded carelessly. "Well, there's one more thing." Ning Qiansheng reached for the bag beside him again. Li Tianlan felt a headache and waved his hand. "Just say it. I'm listening." He was very resistant to the information, especially the information of tens of millions of words. It was so dense that it made him dizzy no matter what. Ning Qiansheng took out a pack of cigarettes from his bag and handed one to Li Tianlan. He threw the empty cigarette pack on the table into the trash can. "You also have to think of a way to deal with the Ministry of Education. The construction of Xianyuan City is progressing well. Although many places are just empty frames, the construction plan has been approved by the City Hall. We have enough funds. There will be more and more construction teams all over the country, which means the construction speed will be faster and faster. By about August next year, the transformation of the entire city should be preliminarily completed. As for the old city, I plan to set up a campus, including elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and universities. So we need a lot of talents in education. It's not going very well at present. I mean, the first university in Tian'an may not be the most famous key university in Zhengzhou State in the short term, but it must have a few top-level majors. Only in this way can we attract some talents and fresh blood. In the next few years, the focus of Xianyuan City will be on the two fields of legislation and education. In the Ministry of Education, the academics have a great influence. I guess you'll need to talk to Hua Zhenyang this time, or directly communicate with the president. Okay. Li Tianlan nodded, raised his glass, and clinked it with Ning Qiansheng. From nothing to something, Li Tianlan drank up the wine in his glass and looked at Ning Qiansheng with a smile. You've worked hard these 2 years. Not really. Ning Qiansheng shook his head. There was a look on his face that Li Tianlan had almost never seen before. He was high-spirited and even full of lofty sentiments. It was a kind of restrained but extremely dazzling confidence, just like how Li Tianlan talked about martial arts. I like this kind of life. His smile was very calm. To change a city, to change a province in the future, and even to change a country in the future, to change the fate of countless people. Compared to martial arts, I prefer who I am now. From nothing to something, Tianlan, you don't know how great a sense of accomplishment I feel watching Xianyuan City change day by day. Our future is in our hands. He poured a glass of wine and raised it. Cheers for the future. His cell phone rang. Li Tianlan drank up the wine in the glass, took out his phone, and looked at the number. A smile appeared on his lips. He answered the phone and said, I have nothing to do. I'm drinking with Qiansheng. His voice was low and soft. Where are you? On the other end of the phone, Qin Weibai's voice came with a smile. I've arrived in Yuzhou. I'm with Nanyun right away. Tianlan, can you pick me up later? Chapter 973. When she picked up the fashion magazine in front of her, Qin Weibai's face had a very satisfied and gentle smile. The soft light quietly fell on her, and her whole person seemed to have a touch of indescribable brilliance. Standing beside her, Horsewoman held a hot mobile phone, and her face was full of helplessness, as if she had been forced to eat dog food. She casually turned a page of the magazine, and Qin Weibai's lazy and cheerful voice rang out. Tianlan will pick us up in Nanyun in a moment. You should arrive half an hour earlier than us. Horsewoman stood there without expression and said a word. Whether Qin Weibai was Qin Weibai or not, at least their habits were completely the same. Horsewoman knew very well that she didn't need to say anything at this time. Qin Weibai held her cheek with one hand, and her rosy lips sucked the juice straw in front of her. When she was in a trance, her eyes were full of smiles. No one knew what she was thinking of. They had long been tired of the feeling of being watched wherever they went. So now, they quietly stayed in the private VVIP lounge of the airport. The classic cartoon Tom and Jerry was playing on the big screen on the wall. Qin Weibai's eyes fell on the screen, and she was in a daze for a long time. Then she let go of the straw and sighed softly. I have talked with Lin Chonglu. In the future, Emperor Dong's palace will be responsible for the fantasy project in Asia, and the transportation channels and trading channels will be controlled by us. In addition, he is willing to sell part of the shares of the 2 casinos in Haojiang to Emperor Dong's palace on the condition that they build a casino in Xianyuan City. In the future, you will negotiate with Lin Chonglu, and the details will be discussed with military counselor. Qin Weibai said softly. Horsewoman was stunned, and then she nodded and said, Okay. As Qin Weibai became the patriarch of the Lin clan, Horsewoman came into contact with more and more people and things of the Lin clan. She was very familiar with the name Lin Chonglu, but when it came to formal meetings, it seemed that she had only met him twice. Lin Chonglu was the patriarch of the largest branch of the Lin clan in Asia, and he used to be one of the Li family's staunch allies. Since the Li family was destroyed more than 20 years ago, Lin Chonglu's force had been a bit distant for the headquarters of the Lin clan. This time, he cooperated with Emperor Dong's palace because he saw the Li family rise again and wanted to build a relationship with Emperor Dong's palace, as expected of an old fox. In terms of seniority, Lin Chonglu could be regarded as Lin Fengting's distant uncle. He was 70 years old this year, and his family headquarters were in Malaya. Relatively speaking, among the major branches of the Lin clan, his strength was not the strongest, at least not comparable to the branches of the Lin clan in Europe, but his foundation was the most stable. He was known as the Rubber King of Malaya and had different degrees of cooperation with the world's major consortiums. At the same time, he also ran more than 100 large-scale gambling in different countries in Asia. In addition, the signature project of Lin Chonglu's family was the fantasy project that Qin Weibai had mentioned. Strictly speaking, fantasy was a kind of drug, but it was an extremely high-grade drug. Fantasy also contained a certain amount of opium, but it used hundreds of different drugs to offset the harm of opium to the human body. Fantasy could be made into cigarettes or the most primitive powder, which was high in purity and extremely difficult to imitate. It could be said to be the gospel for drug addicts. The cost of fantasy was about twice that of regular drugs, but the price was 10 times that of ordinary drugs. Although Lin Chonglu had been strictly keeping the formula of fantasy a secret, he never refused to cooperate, and he was not stingy when distributing profits. Therefore, with fantasy alone, he had very close cooperation and good personal relations with the big drug lords all over the world. The Golden Triangle, the Silver Country, and Colombia could almost be regarded as his sphere of influence. Lin Chonglu's family alone could eat more than 30% of the output of the major plantations every year. This time, Qin Weibai personally talked to Lin Chonglu, which basically meant that Emperor Dong's palace had won the agency of fantasy project in Asia. The profits were still secondary. Emperor Dong's palace could mainly take advantage of this to reach out to the big drug lords and further stabilize its position in the dark world. This was what Qin Weibai valued most. Horsewoman looked down at her watch and whispered, "Boss, it's time to go. The plane will take off in 40 minutes." Qin Weibai seemed to be thinking about something. Hearing this, she frowned and subconsciously glanced at the time in front of her. Wait a little longer. Horsewoman subconsciously wanted to ask who Qin Weibai was waiting for, but before she could speak, the door of the private lounge was gently knocked on. "Open the door." Qin Weibai's tone was calm. Horsewoman walked over and opened the door. A tall and burly bald man stood at the door. The aura all over his body was extremely fierce, and he seemed to be filled with an extremely violent power from head to toe. But the look in his eyes was extremely deep. Horsewoman frowned and suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. Rather than saying that the other party's eyes were deep, it would be better to say that they were dull and lifeless, like a puppet. Her eyes slowly contracted, and her voice was cold. Ghost Flame. She recognized the man. The man was not a nobody in Zhongzhou State or even in the Dark World. Even if the Dark World now had the power beyond the peak of the Invincible Realm, it was impossible for the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm to be a nobody. Ghost Flame of Kunlun City. He was one of the few experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm in Kunlun City, and he was close to the half-step Invincible Realm. The peak of the realm. In everyone's heart, in Gu Xingyun's, and even in Ghost Flame's own heart, he was the most loyal dog to Gu Xingyun. He was loyal and absolutely loyal. Why was he here? What did he want to do? Let him in. Qin Weibai's calm voice sounded behind Horsewoman. Horsewoman took a deep breath, turned sideways little by little, and then walked quickly to Qin Weibai, staring at Ghost Flame's every move. If it was the master of Samsara Palace, she didn't need to worry about anything at all. But Qin Weibai, who was beside her at this time, really didn't know martial arts. In terms of strength, Horsewoman didn't think she had much advantage over Ghost Flame. In this case, she couldn't help but be nervous. Ghost Flame's movements were a little stiff as he reached into his arms. Horsewoman's body instantly tightened. Ghost Flame's palm slowly reached out from his arms. He held a neatly folded envelope in his hand. Mrs. Letter. Ghostfire enunciated each word clearly. His voice sounded extremely strained, and his entire person looked incomparably strange. It was an indescribable stiffness. He was muddle-headed and ignorant, as if he were sleepwalking. This state. Horsewoman suddenly opened her eyes wide. She was familiar with this state, but also strange. She had never experienced it, but she had seen several people in this state. Hypnosis. There was no doubt that Ghostfire had been hypnotized in an extremely thorough way. Under such circumstances, he was completely a puppet of the hypnotized person. Everything he had seen and experienced, whether it was normal or abnormal, was normal in his mind at that moment. A hypnotized expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, Horsewoman felt a little incredible. Qin Weibai reached out to take the envelope in Ghost Flame's hand and opened it. On the neat letter paper, there were countless names densely written in childish handwriting. They were all names. There was no introduction, only names. But for Qin Weibai, this was indeed the most critical information. She held the letter paper, lowered her head, and was silent for a long time. Ghost Flame, who looked a little stiff, left the lounge without saying a word. The door was slowly closed. Qin Weibai sighed softly. After a long time, she murmured, "What a terrible child." Chapter 974. At nearly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in an old county in the jurisdiction of Southwest City, Chen Fangqing, who was a little tired, sat on a chair with a blank face and slowly drank a mouthful of warm water. The winter night was long, and dusk gradually enveloped the sky. The cold wind blew in from the open door of the main hall. It was cold, and the old but still spacious yard looked very cold. After the funeral, it was dead silent. Chen Fangqing was sitting facing the door, and his expression was a little dull. Behind him was an empty ice coffin, and the room was filled with the smell of burning paper money. He sat motionless on the chair, looking a little gloomy. Today was the day of the burial of his daughter, Chun Li Juan. Chen Fangqing returned to his hometown in a low-key manner. The funeral didn't last more than half, which looked extremely simple. In the parliament, Guo Wentian, who was also a banner figure of the Prince Group like Chen Fangqing, attended the funeral. In addition, a Secretary General and Deputy Mayor of Southwest City were also present, and then some relatives who were neither far nor close. Chen Fangqing lowered his head, and his eyes were a little sinister, but more self-deprecating. As the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, the funeral had been simple to the point of being a little shabby. It also seemed to prove his status in the Prince Group. If it was in the period when his influence was at its strongest, even if he repeatedly stated that the funeral should be simple and refused other officials to attend, there would definitely be a lot of people who would really attend. Even if those officials knew that they would be criticized by him after coming, they would still come. The most obvious example was when Guo Wentian's old mother died the year before last. Guo Wentian also had a simple funeral, but the scene of the funeral was extremely grand. Guo Wentian's hometown was in an ordinary city in Tianfu Province. On the day of the funeral, 6 directors of Tianfu Province were present, including the Speaker of Tianfu and the governor. In addition, the Speaker of Southwest City, which was nearby, was also present in person. All the city leaders were present. Although Guo Wentian severely criticized those people afterward, no one was unhappy, whether they were criticized or criticized. Now, Chen Fangqing's funeral was also simple. Then, it really became simple. This alone was enough to show that Chen Fangqing's status in the Prince Group had reached a precarious point. The Haoyue Group scandal was constantly being exposed every day. From Nanyue Province to Tianfu Province, it had now become a serious case that swept across 4 to 5 provinces, involving property, entertainment, securities, insurance, and many other industries. The countless dark sides were shocking. This also represented incredible interest. Even Chen Fangqing did not expect that his nephew would do so many outrageous things in terms of accumulating wealth. The stock price of Haoyue Group had been fluctuating violently. In a short period of time, hundreds of cadres in several provinces had been arrested. The Ministry of Supervision of Zhongzhou State personally took action and handled the case swiftly and decisively. But Chen Fanqing knew very well that although everything seemed to be extremely bad, the Ministry of Supervision had not really taken action yet. They were still collecting more evidence. Before the election, the Southeast Group, which had been holding back for more than 2 years, obviously wanted to make a big news. Faced with such a favorable environment, the other party obviously did not intend to make a move easily. Several large state-owned groups, controlled by Chun Lijuan, were also found to have countless problems. There were also clues that the treason case of the Special Warfare Group had something to do with Chen Fanqing. Such a connection might not be too serious, but at such a critical moment, if such news was confirmed, it was bound to cause another huge storm. The situation was precarious and precarious. Chen Fanqing's but was like an active volcano that would erupt violently at any time, and he might be blown to pieces every minute and every second. In this case, countless people in the Prince Group were quietly distancing themselves from Chen Fanqing, including 2 provincial chairmen he had personally promoted. Chen Fanqing remained silent. He could only be silent, waiting for the opportunity to fight back in silence. Such an opportunity was getting closer and closer, and his situation was becoming more and more dangerous. In the gradually darkening sky, Chen Fanqing gritted his teeth and stood up with a glass of water. The cold wind blew through the room. Guo Wentian, with a white flower on his chest, walked into the yard from the gate. Looking at Chen Fanqing walking out of the main hall, he sighed. "It's time to go back," Guo Wentian said slowly. "The comrades in the southwest have already prepared the plane. There may be a meeting tonight, so we have to prepare early." He took out a cigarette and handed it to Chen Fanqing. Then he lit one and took a deep breath. Chen Fanqing nodded silently. Today was destined to be a very special day. It was not his daughter's funeral, but for the dark world, today was a very special day. 3 days ago, Li Tianlan received a letter of challenge from a mysterious expert in Emperor Dong's palace. And the time of the challenge was today. 2 super experts who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. And it was very likely that they were in the dark world. They were the super experts who were in the best state. Everyone was paying attention to this battle, including the parliament of Zhongzhou State. At this moment, there were less than 4 hours before the battle. Different results of this battle meant different situations. Not to mention the mentality of the parties, countless people in the dark world had begun to get nervous. "Is there any movement in Xianyuan City?" Chen Fanqing asked. "There's no big movement." Guo Wentian shook his head. "The representatives sent by all the superpowers have entered the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace, and Xianyuan City has strengthened its guard. It's normal." On the second day after the letter of challenge was issued, all the forces in the dark world had contacted Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace did not refuse the requests of the superpowers and allowed any force to come to Emperor Dong's palace to watch the peak battle of the dark world in person at the specified time. It seemed like they were showing off their strength, but it also seemed like they were extremely confident. Every move of Emperor Dong's palace in the past 3 days was full of confidence. From top to bottom, no one seemed to think that Li Tianlan might lose. "What do you think of the result of this battle?" Guo Wentian suddenly asked. Chen Fanqing turned his head and glanced at him silently. "This result is important to us, but it's more important to you." Guo Wentian's tone was extremely calm. Chen Fanqing suddenly laughed. "I don't know," he said blandly, "but this may be my only chance. The result of this battle is hard to say. Li Tianlan may win, but I won't lose. Li Tianlan might win the battle, but the winner of the final battle in Beihai could only be him and the Prince Group." In Chen Fanqing's communication with His Majesty and Li Guangtu in advance, as long as Li Tianlan appeared in Beihai, the possibility of him dying was more than 80%. So the result of tonight's battle was not important. The final battle in Beihai that would start at the same time as this battle was the most important. Guo Wentian looked at his smiling face and was silent for a moment. Then he said in a hoarse voice, Recently, our work has been very passive, and the voices within the group are a little chaotic. I have discussed it with some comrades. He raised his head and looked at Chun Fangqing's eyes that suddenly became sharp. He said blandly, "Old Chun, if the result of this final battle in Beihai is not satisfactory, then you should temporarily stay behind the scenes and recuperate." Chapter 975. Chun Fangqing did not speak. He quietly looked at Guo Wentian in front of him and kept silent for a long time. He and Guo Wentian had known each other for more than 30 years. The two had already known each other when they first emerged in the Prince Group, but for many years, the relationship between them had not been harmonious. They were promoted to the level of deputy governor together, and then to the position of provincial governor together. Finally, they became the provincial speaker almost at the same time, and then were elected as members of parliament of Zhongzhou State. 5 years as a member of parliament. During that period, the relationship between Chun Fangqing and Guo Wentian was at its worst. They could almost be said to be incompatible with each other, even to the point of life and death. Because at that time in the Prince Group, there was a person named Zhou Tong. At that time, he was a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State and the speaker of Tianfu Province. At that time, Zhou Tong was the recognized leader of the Prince Group and the most likely powerful figure to become the new president of Zhongzhou State. In the process of competing with Li Huaqing, Zhou Tong could be said to be in the lead all the way. Everyone thought that Zhou Tong would be elected without any suspense. At that time, the Prince Group was very strong, but it was far from being able to cover the sky with one hand. In order to push Zhou Tong up, the Prince Group also made a lot of compromises in secret. When it was tit for tat with the academics, it promised a lot of conditions to the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. This also meant that if Zhou Tong was successfully elected president at that time, even if the whole Prince Group went all out, it could only push a director who could protect Zhou Tong. This director position could only appear from Chun Fangqing or Guo Wentian. With Zhou Tong's existence, only one of them could go up. This was something that they knew each other since they became members of parliament. At that time, the Prince Group could be said to be the most direct competitors. However, no one had expected that 1 month before the election, Zhou Tong, who had been firmly suppressing Li Huaqing, would suddenly be pulled down by Li Huaqing. Furthermore, he was thrown into the abyss. Li Huaqing had caught up to Zhou Tong at the most crucial moment, and Zhou Tong had fallen from heaven to hell, or more accurately, into the desert. Zhou Tong went to the desert prison. Li Huaqing became the president of Zhongzhou State. The Prince Group had no time to react. In the end, they could only push Chun Fangqing and Guo Wentian together to become the directors of Zhongzhou State. Chun Fangqing was the prime minister, and Guo Wentian controlled the National Assembly. They are number 2 and number 3 in Central State. But even so, this is still the biggest fiasco and mistake of the Prince Group in recent decades. After becoming a director, the relationship between Chun Fangqing and Guo Wentian seems to have eased a lot, but the game between the two was too fierce, and there are still clear cracks inside the Prince Group. Chun Fangqing habitually considered problems from the perspective of the overall situation. What he saw was the overall situation, the future of Zhongzhou State, and the overall interests. Guo Wentian is more like the real leader of the Prince Group. He values the interests and future of the Prince Group more. In terms of structure, Chun Fangqing was far superior to Guo Wentian, but in terms of ability, Guo Wentian was slightly superior to Chun Fangqing. The ideas of the two were not exactly the same. For so many years, how could there be real harmony within the seemingly peaceful Prince Group? Chun Fangqing had been under a lot of pressure recently and had almost lost sleep all night. He had to guard against the Southeast Group, Li Tianlan, and Li Huaqing. But most importantly, he had to guard against Guo Wentian, who had been quiet all the time. As the situation worsened, Chun Fangqing knew very well that Guo Wentian would definitely take action. But he did not expect that Guo Wentian would take action at this time. "You are not optimistic about the final battle in Beihai?" Chun Fangqing asked directly. He knew very well what Guo Wentian meant by that sentence. If the final battle in Beihai did not get the result they wanted, then he would retreat behind the scenes to cultivate. Once he retreated, there was basically no possibility for him to appear again. There was still nearly a year before the election. If he went to cultivate at this time, the entire prince group would fall into the hands of Guo Wentian. Guo Wentian obviously wanted to use this year to stabilize his position, even if he had to sacrifice a large part of his strength. And this sacrifice was obviously Chun Fanqing's team. No one can predict the future. I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I just think that there are too many variables in this matter. Guo Wentian said faintly, Li Tianlan is not a fool, and neither is the Wang family of Beihai. Even if the power in your hands is very strong, I really don't believe that the other party will not have any precautions. Don't forget the strange intelligence channels of the Samsara Palace. How could they not know? And I can be sure that Li Tianlan took Li Shi back to Tiannan. On the night he received the letter of challenge, he went directly to the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Heaven Capital. From Li Tianlan's departure to the present, no one has come out of Heaven Capital for 3 days. Even the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which is about to start, didn't send a representative to watch the battle. Li Kuangtu didn't tell you about sending a representative to watch the battle, did he? What do you mean? Chun Fanqing's body trembled slightly. He had not paid attention to Heaven Capital recently. This was the sincerity of his cooperation with Li Kuangtu. They were all allies. Paying too much attention to each other would only cause misunderstanding. No one is sure what happened in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. But in 3 days, if you want to talk about people, even a dog has not come out of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and no one has entered it. The headquarters of the entire Purgatory of Heaven Capital. He was silent for a while and said in a hoarse voice, It's like death. An indescribable chill spread all over Chun Fanqing's body in an instant. Is it? His voice trembled a little. Li Tianlan killed everyone in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital? I don't know, Guo Wentian said lightly. But just by this action, we can at least be sure that Li Tianlan already knows that Li Kuangtu will participate in the decisive battle in North Sea, but Emperor Dong's palace has not shown the slightest retreat so far. Li Tianlan is not afraid of this at all. In this decisive battle, Li Tianlan is very likely to die. Oh, only you believe this because you have to believe it. Chun Fanqing's face twitched. He stood there gloomily and did not speak. At the very least, even if you really win, it may not be a good thing. Guo Wentian continued. His Majesty and Li Kuangtu, who you said will challenge Li Tianlan tonight, are not easy to deal with. Even if you win this time, you may also lose more miserably in the future. I won't lose. Chun Fanqing suddenly calmed down and said lightly. Maybe, Guo Wentian said quietly. You said the decisive battle in North Sea will start tonight. Then we will wait for the result tomorrow. You have been under too much pressure during this time, and everyone hopes you can take a rest. He deliberately emphasized the word everyone. Chun Fanqing narrowed his eyes, his face expressionless. Let's go back to you, Zhou. Guo Wentian moved forward slowly. You go back, Chun Fanqing said lightly. Guo Wentian looked at him in confusion. You're not leaving? I'm going to Xianyuan City now, and then fly to North Sea overnight, Chun Fanqing said expressionlessly. Chapter 976. The bright light shone in the dark room, a little dazzling. Light and darkness intertwined, faintly reflecting the outline in the living room. The sound of the softly shaking reclining chair kept ringing. Looking at the gloomy and mysterious living room through the screen, everyone in the conference room looked solemn and dignified. Wang Xiaoyao was facing the screen. Beside them, the 2 grandmasters of the Invincible Realm in East Island, Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurumi, sat opposite each other. Then Jiang Guachu and Moraid, the current controller of Knights Templars. There were not many people in the conference room, but they represented a considerable part of the power of the Dark World today. Everyone was really important in the Dark World today. The light flowed in the conference room. The 5 Invincible Realm experts quietly stared at the gloomy darkness on the screen in front of them, without saying a word. The meeting had lasted for nearly an hour, but from beginning to end, no one spoke. Time passed minute by minute. After a long time, a clear voice suddenly sounded in the conference room. It was like the sound of the lid of a teacup, gently touching the edge of the cup, soft, delicate, and extremely pleasant. The 5 Invincible Realm experts present subconsciously turned their eyes and looked at each other. Only then did they realize that the sound came from the other end of the screen. Wang Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes. Moraid, Yagyu Kurumi, and Jiang Guochu stood up almost at the same time. Your Majesty, sit down. On the other side of the screen, His Majesty's voice sounded, and he said unhurriedly, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. It's earlier than I expected. Wang Xiaoyao said calmly, Are you ready? His expression was serious and peaceful, without a trace of impatience. Everyone present knew what the hour they had been waiting for meant. Wang Xiaoyao subconsciously looked at the clock on the wall of the conference room. It was 8:05 p.m. in Zhongzhou State Time. At 10:27 p.m. 3 days ago, Li Tianlan returned to Xianyuan City from Yuzhou and received a letter of challenge from His Majesty. The summit appointment that had caused a sensation in the entire Dark World was getting closer and closer. There were less than 3 hours left. Today, the representatives of most of the forces in the Dark World had arrived in Xianyuan City. Behind each representative, there was at least a second-class force that was recognized by everyone. As the party of the summit appointment, His Majesty began his last meditation before the battle at noon that day, and he didn't wake up until now. This was truly a summit meeting. Li Tianlan and His Majesty might not be the only 2 people in the Dark World with the combat capability beyond the peak of the Invincible Realm. But combined with their age, this battle was also endowed with extraordinary significance. The outcome of this battle directly determined who was the first person in the Dark World of this era and whose era it belonged to. His Majesty filled the cup in front of him with tea and stretched his body. He smiled and said, It's very lively outside now. I can feel that everyone is here to watch the show. I'm going to appear. He glanced at Moraid and suddenly asked, Are there any new movements in the outside world's gambling? There's basically no change. Moraid's attitude was always more respectful than that of Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurumi. He lowered his head slightly and said softly, At present, the outside world is generally more optimistic about Li Tianlan. Nearly 70% of the gambling fund support Li Tianlan's victory. Close to 70%. That means less than 70%. Jiang Shangyu was a little surprised. That is to say, in the eyes of outsiders, I have a 64% chance of winning against Li Tianlan, something like that. Moraid nodded. The summit appointment attracted the attention of the whole Dark World. As soon as the news came out, the major financial forces in the Dark World, including the Flourishing Age Fund, had already opened bets. They bet on the outcome, the time of the battle, the post-war injuries, and so on. 3 days was not a long time, but the bets had attracted countless funds. The news Moraid received showed that the amount of money betting on Li Tianlan's victory was infinitely close to 70%. But others might not believe it. At least half of the money was bet by Moraid. Moraid bet on Li Tianlan's victory. This was His Majesty's order. Therefore, in this so-called bet, those who were looking forward to an upset bet on Li Tianlan were destined to lose everything. You didn't play? His Majesty smiled and shifted his gaze from Moraid to the others. 600 million on Li Tianlan's victory. Tianhai Wuji said calmly. Yagyu Kurumi glanced at him and shook his head. 90 million on Li Tianlan. Beihai bet 2 billion on Li Tianlan. I personally bet 300 million on Li Tianlan. Wang Xiaoyao was expressionless. 1 billion. Li Tianlan. Jiang Guochu smiled lazily and said, No one expects to make a fortune by betting. It seems that there are more people who are optimistic about me than I thought. His Majesty smiled gently. Li Tianlan is strong, but how can those people judge clearly when they are in the same realm? There are countless people who want you to win. Many people think that Li Tianlan is not invincible. Wang Xiaoyao's voice was indifferent. Yes, His Majesty said softly. It's a pity that these people are going to be disappointed. The 5 invincible realm experts were indifferent. They knew the inside story of the final battle, so they all bet on Li Tianlan's victory under Moraid's lead. Before the battle began, His Majesty made it clear to them that he was not in his real peak state, so his odds of winning against Li Tianlan were less than 30%. This was a battle that he was almost certain to lose. "How are your preparations going?" His Majesty asked casually. "There are no problems. As soon as the battle between you and Li Tianlan begins, we will take action immediately. Finally, we will meet at the foot of Mount Dibbing." Wang Xiaoyao took a deep breath and said in a solemn tone, "Very good." His Majesty nodded and said, "It's time for me to make a fool of myself. You know you will lose, but you still want to make a fool of yourself. Is it necessary?" Tianhai Wuji casually asked. "Ha!" His Majesty's laughter was full of indifference. "I will lose face tonight, but Li Tianlan will lose his life tonight. I will lose to Li Tianlan, and everyone will think that the future will be Li Tianlan's era. But he will die in Beihai tonight. The ultimate reversal. I like this feeling very much. Once he is dead, who will remember my failure?" He picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. "Believe me, I've been studying Li Tianlan for a long time. His current state is very wonderful, especially when he cooperates with Ruthless, whether it is now or in the future or in the past. Even when Wang Tianzong was in his heyday, Li Tianlan can be said to be the most difficult person to kill. His kendo is perfect." His Majesty was silent for a while and whispered, "But I don't believe that there is a so-called perfection in this world. No matter how perfect a martial arts is, there must be a weakness." Wang Xiaoyao sat up straight and said seriously, "What is Li Tianlan's weakness?" "I don't know." His Majesty shook his head. Tianhai Wuji sneered and said lightly, "A weakness that is not known by others is equal to having no weakness. That's why I asked Li Tianlan to fight." His Majesty said coldly, "It's okay for me to lose face once, but as long as I seize his weakness, tonight will be Li Tianlan's death." Chapter 977. Moraid raised his head and glanced at His Majesty. There was some doubt in his eyes. He wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. In the end, he didn't say anything. Others might not know His Majesty's origin, but Moraid was His Majesty's confidant and disciple. In contrast, he was completely different from Jiang Guochu and Yagi Kurosumi. The latter two were more cooperative with His Majesty. Although His Majesty occupied a dominant position, the essential alliance relationship had not changed. Only Moraid worshipped His Majesty as a real leader. He knew His Majesty's origin and even knew a lot of things that hadn't been experienced in this era. He knew Li Tianlan, Dongqing Huangtu, and Gu Xianyan. Did His Majesty not know Li Tianlan's weakness in the story of the future or the past? As if noticing Moraid's gaze, His Majesty said calmly, "I haven't fought with him." This sentence sounded a little inexplicable, but Moraid understood His Majesty's meaning in an instant. In that story, His Majesty had not fought with Dongqing Huangtu. All his understanding of him was summed up from limited intelligence, combined with some of his own speculations. When Dongqing Huangtu died, His Majesty was forced to fight and then returned here. Moraid was silent for a moment and then laughed. His smile was a little ferocious and insidious. No one knew if he was thinking of His Majesty's forbearance, helplessness, and sadness in that story or something else. His voice was extremely firm. "Your Majesty, don't worry. You are in Tianan. Leave Beihai to me." His Majesty nodded and glanced at Wang Xiaoyao. "It has been arranged." Wang Xiaoyao nodded. "Call the number I gave you. As long as you can successfully leave the battlefield, he will meet you outside Xinyuan City." "Are you sure there is no accident?" His Majesty's voice was cautious and serious. "If there is no accident, he and the helicopter have landed at the predetermined place. The only uncertainty is whether you can successfully leave the battlefield. As long as there is no accident, the helicopter will take you away from Tianan at the fastest speed. In 30 minutes at most, you will appear at Nanya No. 2 Air Force Base. The fighter plane will arrive in Liaodong within an hour, and then someone will arrange for you to arrive at Beihai as soon as possible. Wang Xiaoyao's voice was flat and casual. The commander of the Tian'an Freedom Corps was Ning Ziyuan. It was impossible for Ning Ziyuan to betray Emperor Dong's palace and the Li family, but it didn't mean that the Freedom Corps was full of Li Qianlan's people. Ning Ziyuan was a member of the Southeast Group before Li Tianlan appeared. Di Jiang had also led the Tian'an Freedom Corps before, so it was too easy for Wang Xiaoyao to plant some people there. His promise was strong enough. As long as His Majesty could leave the battlefield, he would be able to appear in the North Sea from Tian'an within 3 hours and participate in the upcoming battle in the North Sea. This speed was extremely fast. At the very least, he could guarantee that he would not be slower than Li Tianlan. Very good. His Majesty nodded. That's settled then. He slowly raised his hand and calmly said, "The meeting ends here. Everyone, I will keep my promise, and I hope that everyone could do their best." It's 8:25, Zhongzhou State Time. In the vague darkness, he revealed an incomparably arrogant smile, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws. In 12 hours, the dark world will officially welcome our era. Before hanging up, he said indifferently, "Let's meet again in North Sea." The screen went black. His Majesty had gone offline. Wang Xiaoyao stood up, came to the window of the conference room, and quietly looked at North Sea outside the window. This was still the hotel where he and Jiang Guochu met. The 5-star hotel under his feet, as well as the 202 branches all over the world, was an adult gift from Wang Tianzong when he was 18 years old. Wang Xiaoyao could still remember the scenes at that time, but he could no longer remember the excitement at that time. The night outside the window was quiet. It was snowing heavily. The wind and snow were blowing. Wang Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes tightly and was silent for a long time. "Let's get started," he said indifferently, turned around, bowed slightly to the other 4 invincible realm experts present, and said flatly, "Everyone, please." 12 hours later, he would become the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. The new era, the new history, was getting closer and closer. The dark cloak fluttered in the dark hall. 2 rows of guard-like armor stood quietly, as if they would never change. The crisp sound of footsteps echoed in the hall, making it seem extremely spacious. Mochizuki Song walked to an armor, expressionlessly stretched out his palm, and pressed it on the chest of the armor. A metal on the chest of the armor was pressed down by a pale and slender finger. Clatter! The sound of an object falling to the ground rang out in the silent hall, sounding extremely harsh. The moment the mechanism of the armor was activated, it swelled up. Countless black objects fell from the inside of the armor and scattered under Mochizuki Song's feet. Mochizuki Song's expression did not change. He bent down to gather the things on the ground bit by bit. It was a lot of black solid matter. It looked like some kind of rubber or some kind of alloy. Piece by piece, it was dark all over. In the dark, it looked like pieces of dark muscles. Mochizuki Song squatted down expressionlessly and covered one of the black muscles on his shoulder. Then his elbow, forearm, back, abdomen, legs, knees, and feet. This kind of alloy code named VX was not the top technology in the dark world. The alloy had been researched for more than a decade, and the formula had been leaked a few years ago. But there were not many people who were willing to use this alloy all the time. VX alloy's greatest function was to absorb a small amount of external force, minimizing the impact. This function could be said to be a divine function of a single-person armor, but its flaw was also extremely prominent, and that was the weight that was enough to affect flexibility. If VX alloy covered the whole body, it would weigh nearly 130 kilograms, and the cost was extremely high. Even a thunder-shocking realm expert would not be willing to bear such a heavy burden during a battle. Invincible realm experts could already ignore the weight of VX alloy. But every invincible realm expert in the dark world was a real big shot, and their combat equipment was not comparable to VX alloy at all. But Mochizuki Song had always liked this alloy. So did the master of Samsara Palace. What they liked was not the performance of VX alloy, but its camouflage function. Piece after piece of alloy reinforced her body. When Mochizuki Song stood up again, she had changed from a slender and tall, beautiful woman to a tall and slightly fat figure that even looked a little burly. In the darkness, she reached out her palm. The sword energy surged, and the black cloak floating in the hall fell into her hand. Mochizuki Song slowly put on the wide cloak. Her figure slowly moved forward and walked out of the hall. Outside the hall, two figures with extremely strong auras stood quietly. The figure on the left was tall and burly, with bulging muscles. Every move of his was extremely aggressive. The figure beside him looked a little thin and quiet, but the danger he gave was no less than that of his companion. The black cloak walked out of the hall. The two men standing in front of the door with different figures were obviously stunned. The scene that seemed to have been sealed in the depths of their memories suddenly surged up. Their bodies stiffened, and they subconsciously muttered to themselves, "Palace Master." The figure under the cloak gave a faint hum. Everything felt like it was yesterday. The thin figure took a deep breath, and his emotions became extremely intense in an instant. "I will secretly enter Wulan State from here, and then cross snow country to Beihai from Wulan State." Under the cloak, Mochizuki Song's voice was faint, a little hoarse, and unquestionable. Even if the Jiang family of South America still has hidden forces, they're now delayed by Mr. Lin in South America. As for Sanctuary and Knights Templars, most of their forces have entered Beihai. Now it's too late for them to come back. So before the end of the final battle in Beihai, you're the top combat force in Europe. An extremely sharp killing intent surged out from under the cloak. "Here, I'll leave it to you, and so do Sanctuary and Knights Templars." "Understood." The two figures tightened their bodies and said in a deep voice, "Go." Mochizuki Song said faintly. The two looked at each other, quickly turned around, and left the hall. These two people were the trump cards left by Mochizuki Song to resist the external pressure. Under such circumstances, the top half-step Invincible Realm experts were enough to decide everything. And these two people were the top half-step Invincible Realm experts. They were silent for a long time, but none of them was a nobody. Samsara Palace, Duke. Samsara Palace, General. Chapter 978. When the screen dimmed, it seemed that the whole world became silent and clear. The tea swayed slightly. His Majesty lay back on the recliner, looked at the time silently, and waited patiently. The recliner creaked and shook with the same rhythm. His breathing slowed down. His heartbeat slowed down. His whole body and mind were completely relaxed. He felt the quieter and clearer world around him. His Majesty was motionless, like a dead thing. In absolute silence, the memories that had become a little fuzzy because of too long time surged in his mind. He was Jiang Shangyu. He had the heavenly king heart and the exquisite bone. In terms of martial arts talent, he was not inferior to Wang Shengxiao, Li Tianlan, or anyone else. Whether in the past or now, in the vast Zhongzhou state, or even the entire dark world, there were only two people of the younger generation who could be taken seriously by him: Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao. The former carried the dilapidated family on his back and moved forward. If he didn't move forward, he would die. The latter carried the glorious family on his back and was careful. If he didn't move forward, he would fall back. Many years ago, when Jiang Shangyu first heard the story of these two people, there was only one thought in his heart. It was tiring to live like this. Whether it was Li Tianlan or Jiang Shangyu, it was tiring to live like this. It was like a kind of transformation from a human to an inhuman. Countless halos, everyone's attention, a bumpy road ahead, a dangerous future, surging winds and clouds, magnificent waves, stormy waves. Being born as a human seemed to be like an origin. Standing at the origin, whether it was Li Tianlan or Wang Shengxiao, they were born with the responsibility to move forward. So they strode on their own path, crossed everything, and smashed everything. If they failed, they would become dry bones on the road, from a human to a ghost. If they succeeded, they would set foot on the peak with glory, from a human to a god. If they failed, they would become stories and lessons. If they succeeded, they would become beliefs and symbols. They couldn't stay at the origin. They were born as human beings. From the very beginning, their life direction had been determined. Jiang Shangyu didn't like such a life. He had always thought that he was a person without ambition and didn't want to pursue what he shouldn't get. He liked a quiet and warm life, a good family background, and a status that wouldn't be ignored or taken too seriously. He was very satisfied with all of this. If there were no accidents, he felt that he could guard the Jiang family and Beijiang for the rest of his life. It was warm, calm, and without sharpness. This was Jiang Shangyu when he was young. The year he entered the Deep Sea Academy, he was 22 years old, and his personality had not changed much from his youth. He did not establish his own force within the academy, and the reason why he rarely fought with others was because of the academy's missions. He did not hurt the friendliness of others, and was always kind to others. Everyone knew that he was very strong, so no one was willing to provoke him, and he did not provoke others either. Gentle temperament, easy to get along with, low-key, but powerful. During his 3 years in the Deep Sea Academy, he had made friends all over the academy, even in the Sky Academy. Among them was Li Tianlan. It might not be appropriate to call them friends. He and Li Tianlan never had a heart-to-heart talk. Their friendship seemed to be limited to sitting together and chatting. At that time, Li Tianlan was proud and arrogant. During the 3 years in the Sky Academy, he showed off his abilities. The life of holding the little princess of Beihai in his left arm and the daughter of the Dongshan clan in his right arm could be said to be the peak of everyone's dream. At the end of the first academic year of the two academies, Wang Tianzong personally went to the Li family's camp to propose marriage, promising to marry Wang Yuetong to Li Tianlan, and their first child in the future could be surnamed Li. No one knew whether it was because of guilt or other reasons. Li Honghe joined the Wang family of Beihai. The Li family left the camp in the second year of the two academies and took root in Jiangzhou. At the beginning of the third year, Li Tianlan, who had recultivated, was well prepared. 3 months after entering the Thundershocking Realm, he went straight to the peak of the Thundershocking Realm and completely defeated Gu Han, the young master of Kunlun City, in 45 seconds. Li Tianlan was 22 years old that year. He was the youngest expert at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm in the entire Dark World in 100 years. From that time on, Gu Han completely fell from the ranks of the top geniuses. People called him and Wang Shengxiao, the young, chosen one, a thing of the past. That year, Wang Shengxiao successfully broke through and entered the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. Li Tianlan, Wang Shengxiao. The Gemini stars of Beihai shone on each other, and their names resounded throughout the Dark World. Jiang Shangyu, who was undisciplined, did not alienate Li Tianlan at that time, but he did not deliberately get close to him either. At that time, he had been thinking about his Jiang family and Beijiang. He wanted to protect everything he had and live a quiet life. The friendship between gentlemen was as indifferent as water. He did not know whether he and Li Tianlan were gentlemen or not, but the friendship between them was really as indifferent as water. If Li Tianlan had not suddenly and violently turned against the Wang family of Beihai in the end, the friendship between them might have lasted for a lifetime. When they were old, they might have become real friends or even confidants. But there were no ifs in the world. The year when he joined the Wang family of Beihai, Li Tianlan was 20 years old. The year when he parted ways with Beihai, Li Tianlan was 26 years old. The 6-year honeymoon period had completely broken up before anyone could react. At that time, there was no Gemini stars of Beihai in the Dark World. Instead, it was double invincible of Beihai, Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu was not completely sure about Li Tianlan's stay at that time, but it was certain that Li Tianlan, who had left Beihai, was in a similar state to the current Li Tianlan. Neither of them entered the invincible realm, but the actual combat capability was far beyond the peak of the invincible realm. So at that time, Beihai had two majesties. This might be a foreshadowing. No one knew the inside story of the break between the two sides at that time, but after it happened, there was no need to know. Maybe it was because they were uneasy about Li Tianlan's rapid growth. Maybe it was because Li Tianlan spoiled Gu Xianyan, whom he forcibly snatched from Kunlun City, which caused the Wang family of Beihai's dissatisfaction. Maybe Li Tianlan himself had other ideas. But the trigger of everything was the child. Wang Yuedong and Li Tianlan's child. At the age of 25, Wang Yuedong was 6 months pregnant, but one day she suddenly went to the hospital. The child was gone. Li Tianlan stayed silent for a whole year, silently accompanying Wang Yuetong, and then left Mount Dibing alone the next year. The huge contradiction completely erupted in a way that left everyone dumbfounded. The situation was chaotic. Jiang Shanyu wanted to stay out of it, but his father, Jiang Shan, felt that the time was ripe and wanted to go further. So Beijiang became Jiang Shan's bargaining chip and was involved in the chaos. After leaving Beihai, Li Tianlan, who needed to find a new headquarters for Emperor Dong's palace, naturally set his eyes on Beijiang, which was sparsely populated and rich in resources. He did not choose to stay in Zhongyuan or Jiangzhou. At that time, he just casually and calmly said a sentence at the meeting of the Hidden Dragon Sea. I want Beijiang. Without discussion or probing, it was as simple and direct as a notice. No one could imagine how insufferably arrogant Li Tianlan could be at that time. That kind of strength and majesty was simply irresistible. Li Tianlan said he wanted Beijiang. The academics were silent. The Prince Group was silent. The Special Warfare Group, the North Group, and the Southeast Group, which had almost no sense of existence, were silent. Except for the giant group that expressed its support, the 5 groups all seemed to acquiesce in this fact. It was not until more than a year later that Jiang Shangyu learned through special channels that on the night of leaving Mount Dibing, the Sword Emperor, who had been invincible for decades, lost to the 26-year-old Li Tianlan. This was also the main reason for the silence of the Southeast Group. Li Tianlan wanted Beijiang. The Jiang family, Jiang Shangyu, other people, other forces, Li Tianlan didn't even look at it. He was indeed qualified to be arrogant. All the resistance of the Jiang family was directly disintegrated by Emperor Dong's palace. The provincial government of Beijiang was directly reorganized, the direction of the parliament changed, the military retreated, and the industry of the Jiang family suffered a fatal blow overnight. Jiang Shanyu looked for Li Tianlan. He said that he just wanted to guard Beijiang and the Jiang family. At that time, Li Tianlan looked at him for a long time. The Jiang family is yours, but Beijiang is not. That was his answer. The Jiang family persisted in Beijiang for more than a year. Emperor Dong's palace continued to develop in Beijiang, and the Jiang family almost became a joke. 28 years old, Li Tianlan, who had not entered the invincible realm, broke through again. Supremacy. Jiang Shan, who was completely at the end of his rope, could only look for Li Tianlan to beg for mercy. Li Tianlan let the Jiang family go, just like letting go of an ant. He also casually took something from her. He took away Jiang Shan's heart. His memory was a little fuzzy. Jiang Shangyu didn't know what Jiang Shan had done to turn the tables in that year and angered Li Tianlan. It didn't matter. Right and wrong were meaningless. Jiang Shangyu only knew that he was guarding the broken Jiang family, watching countless so-called super forces in the dark world bow down to Emperor Dong's palace, watching Kunlun City fall apart little by little, watching the Wang family of Beihai's influence decline, watching the Wang family of Beihai win Gu Xingyan again in order to turn the tables, and watching Li Tianlan die. Half a year after the fall of the Chosen One, he was forced to go to Beihai, facing the completely crazy woman and the completely crazy sword. The sword light rose with the wind, and the poison followed like a shadow. He fell into the darkness, and when he opened his eyes, he returned to his childhood. The scars on his body clearly recorded what had happened. Right and wrong really didn't matter anymore, and he couldn't tell. Jiang Shangyu became his majesty. In this life, he still didn't have too much ambition, but he had an obsession. Li Tianlan owed the Jiang family a heart. He wanted to get it back. He wanted to build a dynasty that could completely destroy Emperor Dong's palace from the front. In that era, when he was extremely powerless, under the glory of Emperor Dong's palace, even the invincible realm experts had to bow down to the thunder-shocking realm experts of Emperor Dong's palace. Peak of the invincible realm? Super forces? Top experts? They were as humble as dust, as nonentities as wild dogs, worthless and not worth mentioning. Jiang Shangyu didn't want to experience that era again. He didn't want to be a ghost, nor a dog. He just wanted to live like a human being. The bell rang in the dark living room. The bell reverberated and rang 10 times in a row. At 22 o'clock at night, Jiang Shangyu moved his body slowly. Time was passing. Tick-tock. Jiang Shangyu stood up and drank the tea beside him. He closed his eyes and felt every part of his body, every joint, every muscle, and even every cell. He stood there quietly, but all the power in his body was unprecedentedly active and surging. The darkness in the living room grew deeper and deeper, swallowing the light and covering everything. At 22:15, he opened his eyes. In the dark room, the world in front of him became extremely clear. His heart was beating slowly. In a place not too far away from Xianyuan City, another faint heartbeat completely overlapped with his own heartbeat. The extreme darkness slowly condensed in the living room. Jiang Shangyu's body disappeared little by little, quietly. An incomparably violent heartbeat suddenly rang out in the empty living room, like the roar of thunder. The darkness spread out, rushed out of the living room, rushed out of the courtyard, rolled over the sky, and covered the stars. It was boundless. That was the purest domain of the dark world in the past 100 years. You saw heaven and earth. The world in your sight was me. Chapter 979. The sky became darker in the darkness. On the lawn inside Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, who had been quietly standing there with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes when he heard the violent heartbeat in the distance. It could not be said that they were telepathic or attracted to each other. The moment he opened his eyes, the world in front of him seemed to have changed. The subtle and rapid changes kept moving forward, covering Xianyuan City, Emperor Dong's palace, and the whole world. The night was darker, and the night was quieter. The world was originally quiet. In the corner of Emperor Dong's palace stood many figures with powerful auras. They were all representatives of the superpowers in the dark world. The summit appointment caused a sensation in the dark world. All the superpowers had submitted applications to Emperor Dong's palace before the final battle. Everyone wanted to be a witness of this battle. Li Tianlan personally made the decision and sent an invitation to all the second-class superpowers in the dark world. Most of the superpowers sent representatives to watch the battle, except for two. One was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The other was the Wang family of Beihai. The representatives of the superpowers stood in different corners and waited silently. It could be said that Li Tianlan's confidence to let the whole dark world witness this summit appointment. It could also be regarded as a naked show of force by Emperor Dong's palace. The representatives of the superpowers needed this battle to determine the terror of the supreme combat capability in the dark world and to determine their attitude. Li Tianlan also needed them to witness this battle to completely establish the position of Emperor Dong's palace. Tonight, at this moment, Li Tianlan won this summit appointment. He was the real Emperor Dong, which meant that the shadow of the Sword Emperor would completely disappear. Li Tianlan breathed softly. He stepped on the grass with his bare feet and took a step forward. The darkness in the distance approached Emperor Dong's palace in an instant. Countless eyes were gathered on Li Tianlan. At this moment, the representatives of the superpowers didn't notice anything unusual, but they instinctively felt a little uneasy. Li Tianlan silently looked at the night sky in the distance. The darkness that seemed to be integrated with the night spread rapidly in the distance and covered everything. Bang! The second violent heartbeat suddenly rang out. In an instant, darkness completely covered the whole Emperor Dong's palace. Like smoke, like fog, dead silence, gloomy. All the lights in Emperor Dong's palace disappeared in an instant. The starry sky was completely swallowed by darkness, leaving only darkness between heaven and earth. Lightless city, a night without light. All the spectators couldn't even see the battlefield. There was only darkness left in front of Li Tianlan. Why did you choose to be my enemy? A calm and gentle voice rang out without warning. It rang in Li Tianlan's ears. It rang in everyone's ears in Emperor Dong's palace. The voice was low and sweet, and it kept echoing within the area of Emperor Dong's palace. Sound. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slowly, and his eyes became extremely focused. It really is you, after a pause, he continued. It's really you. His tone seemed to contain countless emotions, but it also seemed like he had no emotions at all. Who am I? In the darkness, the voice was like the whisper of a demon, reverberating in everyone's ears. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. He seemed to want to say something, but he suddenly fell silent. The voice was so clear and familiar. This was the voice that Li Tianlan had heard just a few days ago. He was sure that it was Jiang Shangyu's voice. The information given to him by the military counselor said that the mysterious master came from the Jiang family, and it was very likely that it was Jiang Shangyu. All of this was consistent with the information. Why Jiang Shangyu had this kind of combat capability was not important now. The important thing was this voice in the darkness really Jiang Shangyu? If it was Jiang Shangyu, why did he take action now? The last time he met Jiang Shangyu was 4 days ago. The night before that day, he flew from Tiannan to Huading and killed Zhu with one blow. Then, in the middle of the night, he went directly from Yuzhou to Kunlun City in Beijiang, seriously injured Gu Xingyun, and took Li Qingqing away. Jiang Shangyu went to the hospital because of Li Qingqing. He traveled thousands of miles in a day and faced 2 invincible realm experts. There was no doubt that Li Tianlan consumed some energy. No matter how big or small the consumption was, it always existed objectively. If Jiang Shangyu wanted to take action, it was the best choice to fall out with him that day. Moreover, Li Qingqing happened to be in the hospital at that time. But he chose to give in and chose to fight today. Why? There seemed to be many reasons, but no matter which one, it was a bit far-fetched. The most reasonable explanation was that Jiang Shangyu did not have the ability to challenge Li Tianlan that day. If Jiang Shangyu didn't have this ability that day, then was the voice in the darkness Jiang Shangyu really Jiang Shangyu? Who are you? Li Tianlan took the initiative to ask. His voice could not be covered by the darkness, and it also resounded through the whole world. It's really you. It's really you. Who am I? Who are you? The summit meeting at the highest level, the inexplicable conversation in the darkness, everything seemed extremely strange. The vast sword energy filled the whole Emperor Dong's palace, blending with the ubiquitous darkness and constantly fighting against it. It was completely dark in front of her. A wind of nothingness blew through the luxurious living room. Her soft long hair was blown by the wind. Qin Weibai stood in front of the window and looked at the darkness outside. Her face was a little pale. You see, he began to doubt. Doubt leads to thinking. What kind of answer do you think he will think of? What kind of fact will he perceive? Suddenly, Jiang Shangyu's voice rang out beside Qin Weibai with a hint of laughter. The area where the sword energy and the darkness intertwined. Suddenly, there was a slight blank. A transparent figure that seemed to be completely condensed from the air stood there, and his tone was a little playful. As Qin Weibai's personal bodyguard, Horsewoman wanted to take action immediately. She suddenly took a step forward. Before she started to attack, Qin Weibai's voice had already sounded, "Don't move." Horsewoman's body stayed where it was, and her long golden hair was flying wildly in the darkness. Her eyes were fixed on the transparent shadow, and her breath was extremely fierce. In Tianlan's sword intent, "How dare you appear beside me?" Qin Weibai looked at the shadow. In the darkness, her eyes were extremely cold. He is not at his peak state. As long as he doesn't really step into that realm, I have nothing to be afraid of. The shadow said blandly, I'm just a shadow. I have no killing intent, no aggressiveness, just pure consciousness. Li Tianlan can't find me. Qin Weibai looked at him quietly. After about 5 or 6 seconds, she said blandly, Get out. We have nothing to talk about. Are you sure? The shadow laughed. It's true that I won't tell Li Tianlan that Qin Weibai isn't Qin Weibai. He may not believe it even if I tell him, but I can guide him slowly. For example, right now, he has begun to suspect that Jiang Shangyu isn't Jiang Shangyu. If I deliberately guide him, he will find out that you're a fake sooner or later. What will you do then? What will he do? Tut tut, the heavenly son of a generation. I think he will completely collapse at that time, right? I really look forward to it. You underestimate him too much. Qin Weibai said coldly. I can give you a chance. If you help me do 3 things, Jiang Shangyu will always be Jiang Shangyu. This is the deal between us, and it is also our secret. The shadow's voice was indescribably tempting. In the darkness, Qin Weibai smiled extremely beautifully. Get out. The shadow was silent for a moment. He slowly disappeared where he was. Sword energy and darkness filled the blank area again. His voice rang in Qin Weibai's ear. You will regret it. The next second, everyone in the entire Emperor Dong's palace heard Jiang Shangyu's answer to Li Tianlan. Me? He laughed and said, You can call me your majesty. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. In the absolute darkness, he took a step forward and raised his palm. The sword energy was like a tide. The tide was monstrous. The violent sword energy suddenly bloomed with his whole body as the center. In the absolute darkness, dazzling bright sword light appeared one after another. The light was boundless. Li Tianlan stood in the center of the light, raised his head, and looked up at the enemy in front of him. His sword light did not pierce the darkness in front of him, but it illuminated the enemy in front of him. A figure more than 20 meters tall stood silently in front of Li Tianlan. He looked down at Li Tianlan like a giant looking at an ant. In the darkness, Jiang Shangyu's voice rang out. Is it fun? Chapter 980. The whole picture seemed to be completely out of reality for a moment, and it became extremely weird. The dark figure was extremely deep and solid in the light of the sword light. He was more than 20 meters tall and had strong limbs. There was absolute power in silence. The surging darkness continued to converge toward the giant-like black shadow. The giant's body moved. The next second, there was a sudden violent roar between heaven and earth. The giant, who was more than 20 meters tall, raised his arm and punched Li Tianlan hard. It was a strange domain that had never been seen before, an incredible fighting method, and a nightmarish fighting style. This was the domain. It was a domain that surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. No one could have imagined that the domain above the peak of the invincible realm would have such a change. Li Tianlan frowned. The huge fist blocked almost all of his vision above his head. The giant's upper body tilted and his knees bent. The solid fist broke the space. As his whole body sank, the surging darkness madly gathered on his fist. His body was getting smaller and smaller, more and more illusory, but the black fist was constantly getting bigger and bigger. Li Tianlan's figure flickered slightly and was 100 meters away in an instant. Boom! Amidst the deafening roar, the black fist directly smashed into the verdant grassland. The turf within 100 meters nearby was suddenly lifted into the air, and the soil was flying. The huge crack center on the place where Li Tianlan originally stood continued to spread around. Li Tianlan's body floated in the air, and the ferocious crack spread rapidly from his feet with great power. Countless cracks crisscrossed in the area of nearly a kilometer, like a ferocious and ugly spider web. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly laughed. How is it? Jiang Shangyu's voice echoed heavily in the darkness. You're a little interesting now. With a smile on his face, Li Tianlan's eyes were bright and focused, with a temperature that was constantly rising, becoming blazing and excited. He was not an absolute martial arts addict, but standing at his height, he was indeed a little lonely. No one could understand exactly what kind of path he had found in the desert during the 2 years. Lin Fengding had some guesses. After talking with him, Sen also had some guesses, but their thoughts were not completely accurate. Li Tianlan could be sure that he was the strongest in the Dark World today. Except for Wang Tianzong in the period of Mormons, no one was his opponent, including Lin Fengting, including Li Kuang too. That was why Emperor Dong's palace believed that the old era was over and a new dawn was coming. Then Li Tianlan met Jiang Shangyu. For hundreds of years since the Dark World had the Invincible Realm, he was the first opponent to break through the limit of the peak Invincible Realm from the direction of the domain. Li Tianlan's confidence never wavered, but such an opponent was indeed interesting to him. Prostrate, the giant on the ground slowly stood up. Darkness completely condensed into his body. The sword light illuminated his body that was getting taller and taller. His expression could not be seen. The giant's face was pitch black without any facial features. Jiang Shangyu did not speak. Amidst the silence, the giant raised its hands again. The boundless domain continued to shrink. Without any warning, the space distorted. The giant clenched his fists and punched forward without hesitation. He was hundreds of meters away from Li Tianlan. The two thick arms kept elongating in the darkness. In the blink of an eye, they had covered a distance of hundreds of meters and were directly in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's figure slightly intertwined in the sword light and the darkness, just avoiding the huge fist. The powerful shock wave surged unscrupulously inside Emperor Dong's palace, and the whole palace was shaking. The arms that seemed to be able to easily smash everything suddenly moved horizontally at the moment when Li Tianlan dodged. In the dense sound, the neat forest behind Li Tianlan was completely swept away. Countless trees flew around, and leaves fluttered. Light and darkness constantly intertwined. Li Tianlan's footsteps did not stop. As a step fell, an identical shadow appeared beside him. The two Li Tianlans took a step in opposite directions at the same time. So the two Li Tianlans became four. The four identical shadows moved again. Under the giant's iron fist, there were 8 identical Li Tianlans, but their movements were completely different. Boom! Without any hesitation, the giant waved his arms wildly. When a huge force surged out from the left and right sides, the pressure on the top suddenly increased. 2 arms appeared on both sides of the giant's body again, and then 2 more. It was an incredible scene. One appalling power. 6 dark arms spread wildly, like a windmill, smashing down along Li Tianlan's shadow without interruption. Violent wind and rainstorm. 8 shadows were moving. Li Tianlan's body shuttled freely among the shadows. This was the shadow formula he learned from tribulation. In Li Tianlan's view, this could almost be said to be the most amazing, unique skill in the Dark World in the past 100 years. At this moment, in his hands, it had almost been exerted to the extreme. The sky was full of fish shadows. From Li Tianlan's perspective, the huge fish shadows were like wild beasts rampaging in the dark sky. His body moved, and the 8th shadow stayed where it was. The sword light shone, and the 8 figures condensed by sword chi became more and more fierce. Li Tianlan slowly took a step forward in the sky, full of fish shadows. The 9th and last shadow appeared where it was. In an instant, Li Tianlan stood on the head of the giant. The 9 shadows still maintained Li Tianlan's appearance. But Li Tianlan turned into a sword light in an instant. It was a soundless step, a step without any smoke or fire. His bare feet stepped on the giant's head. In the darkness, he became the most dazzling and blazing blade. Light, the sword light all over the sky did not break out, but quickly gathered toward Li Tianlan's body and condensed to the extreme. Countless sword lights and monstrous sword chi completely illuminated the whole night at this moment. The light shrank along Li Tianlan's body. The 9 shadows disappeared one by one. Li Tianlan's body became brighter and brighter, more and more dazzling. The 6 arms of the giant frantically grabbed his head. Li Tianlan gently stamped his feet. He was not ruthless. He was barehanded. His whole body was like the sharpest magic weapon in the world, and also like the most dazzling light in the world, piercing the darkness in an instant. Endless light tore the giant's body in the darkness, and it fell down. The giant's figure was broken by the sword light little by little. The giant disappeared. Li Tianlan stood on the ground, looked at the surging darkness, and narrowed his eyes. "What are you looking for?" A soft, low, but extremely strange voice rang in Li Tianlan's ears. There seemed to be chaos around Emperor Dong's palace, but Li Tianlan did not hear any sound in his perception. Only the clear sound of footsteps could be heard in front of him. Jiang Shangyu's figure came out of the darkness. Li Tianlan looked at Jiang Shangyu, expressionless, and did not mean to speak at all. Jiang Shangyu's body stood 20 meters away from Li Tianlan. His figure stopped, but the footsteps did not disappear. Instead, they became clearer and more frequent. It was as if hundreds or thousands of people had walked into the darkness and then walked out from the darkness. They came out. A figure walked through the darkness. Another one. There were more and more figures in the darkness. They were all Jiang Shangyu. Every one of them was Jiang Shangyu. 100, 300, 500, 1,000. Countless Jiang Shangyu completely surrounded Li Tianlan in the middle. "I'm right here." All the Jiang Shangyu spoke at the same time, with a roar of voices. "What are you looking for?" Countless Jiang Shangyu did the same action. They pressed their faces. In an instant, hundreds of Jiang Shangyu all turned into Li Tianlan's appearance. Li Tianlan stood in the middle, surrounded by countless himself. The voice in the darkness laughed, and even the voice seemed to be exactly the same as Li Tianlan's. Li Tianlan looked at the strange smiling faces on the faces of countless people around him, and his face became cold little by little. "Are you looking for me?" The darkness was still surging. All the Jiang Shangyu became Qin Wei Bai. "Are you looking for me?" His voice was a little pitiful and mocking. "Poor thing who has been cheated, can you still find me?" Chapter 981. Li Tianlan stood where he was and narrowed his eyes. The countless Qin Wei Bais around him did not decrease. Instead, there were more and more. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of identical figures occupied every place in his field of vision. In front of him, in the distance, beside him, behind him, and in the sky. There were Qin Wei Bais everywhere. They were clear and vague. The darkness floated quietly around him, like the night of the world. Everything seemed to be the same as the ordinary night. Countless Qin Wei Bais were half hidden in the darkness in the distance, forming a breathtaking but extremely terrifying picture. The world seemed to be dead. There was no sound at all, only eternal darkness. This was a domain beyond the peak of the invincible realm, not to mention other people in the dark world. Even Li Tianlan himself had encountered such an opponent for the first time. His invincible confidence had never been shaken, but now he really did not see the direction of this martial arts clearly. This could not even be called martial arts. In terms of combat capability and destructive power, Jiang Shangyu was not the strongest. But the extreme change of the domain after surpassing the peak of the invincible realm made Jiang Shangyu the most difficult person to kill and defeat. The dark domain in front of him was extremely clear, but it surrounded him in a trance. It was an indescribable feeling. The other party's domain was in front of him. He could see it, but he could not feel it, let alone destroy it. In the dark domain, everything was divorced from reality, but it had substance. To some extent, they might also be a kind of reality, the reality that only belonged to Jiang Shangyu. For example, the image of the giant that penetrated the sky and the earth, and the boundless figures now. Weird, changeable, and incredible. In his own domain, Jiang Shangyu was almost invincible. Hiding the head and showing the tail, is this the battle in your heart? Li Tianlan said slowly. His voice was calm, without any wavering or other emotions. "I'm right in front of you." Jiang Shangyu smiled faintly. "The world you see is me." The boundless crowd in front of him began to change. The figures of Qin Weibai's kept twisting and turning into different people one after another. Men and women, old and children, countless people, completely different people. Bang! Li Tianlan's heart beat violently. The heartbeat seemed to drive a great force, and the darkness in front of him suddenly twisted for a moment. Layers of seemingly endless sword intent once again surged in the realm of darkness. Jiang Shangyu's cold voice resounded through the whole field. Are you going to risk your life? If you can't see through my domain, you'll die here tonight. In the darkness, countless sword chis kept rising. Li Tianlan glanced at the crowd in front of him. The crowd was still changing, and the number of people seemed to be increasing. Everything in front of him, apart from the darkness, was only the silhouettes of people in the dark. I can't see through it, he said faintly and slowly closed his eyes. The figure in front of him disappeared. Only darkness existed. The only difference between opening and closing his eyes was the lack of countless figures in front of him. Jiang Shangyu's remaining laughter suddenly disappeared. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth lifted slightly. His clothes were torn and wrinkled. In the dark, he stood on the ground with his bare feet on the bed. His eyes were closed, and he was motionless. But at this moment, Li Tianlan gave Jiang Shangyu a deadly sense of danger. If he couldn't see through it, then he wouldn't look at it. This was Li Tianlan's choice. A gust of wind appeared in the realm of darkness. Countless footsteps could be heard. The footsteps became more and more hurried, faster and faster, pressing in from all directions. Whoosh! In the dull sound, a clenched fist slammed into Li Tianlan's face. This seemed to be just the beginning. The next second, overwhelming attacks instantly rushed in front of Li Tianlan. The endless crowd rushed toward Li Tianlan. They were weak and small, but extremely dense. The attack power of each person was not even as good as that of an ordinary person. But there were too many people, and everyone seemed to be desperately trying to hurt Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took a gentle step forward. The dazzling sword light suddenly shone in the darkness. The sword light cut into the crowd without any hesitation. In the blink of an eye, there was an open space in front of Li Tianlan. There was no blood, no corpses. As the sword light passed, all the figures nearby disappeared. The next second, the figures behind filled the void and rushed toward Li Tianlan again. Dong! 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 The loud heartbeat sounded in the crowd. The sound was getting louder and louder, as if it resonated with the whole world. The whole dark realm was shaking slightly. The ubiquitous sword energy in the realm began to spin faster and faster. In the darkness, the extremely bright sword light lit up in every corner of the realm. The crowd all over the realm disappeared one by one and turned into nothingness. Only the sword light was getting brighter and brighter. Boom! There seemed to be a sudden clap of thunder in his ears. The dazzling lightning lit up in the darkness. Several figures burned with blue electric arcs and directly hit the sword energy in front of Li Tianlan. One after another. Each figure was like a full blow from a thunder-shocking realm expert. There was no pause, no interval. The dense figures approached Li Tianlan crazily and then disappeared under the sword light. There were fewer and fewer figures in the realm, but their strength was getting stronger and stronger. The figures of the thunder-shocking realm began to appear. Then came the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Then came the half-step invincible realm. One after another, the illusory figures with real power exploded in front of Li Tianlan as if they were self-detonating. Li Tianlan kept moving forward, heading in a certain direction in the darkness. He was firm. The figures of the thunder-shocking realm disappeared. The dark realm became extremely empty. A few figures were still appearing, and all of them were of the half-step invincible realm. The suicidal attacks came one after another. The sword energy in front of Li Tianlan finally began to dissipate little by little. From beginning to end, Li Tianlan didn't open his eyes. The experts of the half-step invincible realm disappeared. The figures in the huge dark realm were almost completely gone. Amidst the heavy footsteps, a few remaining figures slowly approached. There was no communication. Attack! The majestic power suddenly exploded around Li Tianlan. From all directions and in all directions, the frenzied attacks brought forth wave after wave of torrents of power. There was no realm or sword energy, but this was indeed the power of the invincible realm. The power of several invincible realm experts. In the dark world, Li Tianlan opened his hands. His entire person seemed to have once again turned into a sharp divine weapon that could shake the world. With him as the center, the violent sword energy suddenly broke through the obstacles around him and lit up the whole realm in an instant. Several violent currents of power were completely torn apart, and several figures of the invincible realm in the realm were directly smashed into nothingness at the moment when the sword light broke out. I see. Li Tianlan stood where he was, and his voice was soft. Jiang Shangyu didn't speak. There was dead silence in the dark realm. This is your realm? Li Tianlan laughed. It wasn't until this moment that he understood Jiang Shangyu's so-called realm and the extreme changes of the realm above the peak of the invincible realm. In his own realm, Jiang Shangyu was almost omnipotent. As long as his stamina and strength were sufficient, he could do anything. He could become a giant that surpassed reality, and the densely packed figures could transform as he wished. No matter how he transformed, the essence of this transformation was power. It was the power of Jiang Shangyu. If he wanted, he could even use his power to create dragons, ghosts, and even missiles and fighter jets in his own realm. Fancy things. He could do whatever he wanted. But no matter what he made, the power of the things he made had a limit. What was Jiang Shangyu's limit? The things he made in the realm would be one level lower than his limit. This was the realm after the peak of the invincible realm. It was an incomparably real illusion. The realm in front of him could be said to be Jiang Shangyu's world, a world that belonged only to him. Li Tianlan stood quietly in the same place, keeping his hands open. It suddenly rained in the dark world. The extremely condensed raindrops fell from the sky, and each raindrop carried extremely pure sword energy. Li Tianlan's figure flashed in each raindrop. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, covering the whole realm. Li Tianlan's smile became more and more obvious. He opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "I see you." Chapter 982. The rain condensed by the sword Qi continued to fall, from light to dense, hurried, and violent. There was a violent roar in the dark domain. The sword rain was like a waterfall, as if to overturn the whole world. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in every drop of rain. Every drop of rain was his eyes, and even his body. The rain spread out from Li Tianlan's head and covered the whole domain. The next second, Li Tianlan's figure disappeared. The strong sword light, like a meteor, instantly condensed into one point and stabbed straight into the void in the darkness. Light and darkness suddenly intertwined. Wherever the sword light passed, the darkness of the void boiled completely, and a violent power held up against the dazzling sword light. The next moment, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu's figures instantly drew closer. Attack! The crazy roar of the dragon reached its peak in an instant. At such a close distance, there was almost no room for the two sides to dodge. Li Tianlan's body seemed to be pulled by his own strength, and the dragon fist full of absolute explosive power directly hit Jiang Shangyu's chest. Jiang Shangyu had completely integrated with the darkness. His body was dark, and his whole body seemed to be weightless. The fist that hit his face drove his body to float back half a meter. The moment he avoided the attack, Jiang Shangyu's whole person changed completely. Strong, cold, and crazy. Weird. The whites of Jiang Shangyu's eyes were completely occupied by the black eyeballs. In the darkness, his dark eyes reflected Li Tianlan's every move. His will was absolutely focused, and the storm-like attacks did not stop for a moment. Jiang Shangyu could always dodge half a second or even a few tenths of a second in advance. The darkness and the sword light constantly blended and collided, and the two figures seemed to completely become two flickering ghosts. Dodge, attack, and counterattack. Jiang Shangyu's movements were not as fast as Li Tianlan's, but his perception seemed to be more sensitive than Li Tianlan's. He could always predict Li Tianlan's movements one step ahead. Most of the time, he was dodging, but every counterattack was fatal and dangerous. The dragon roar became louder and louder. Li Tianlan was completely combining the 72 styles of Dragon Fist at will. The overwhelming dragon shadow with majestic power crazily bombarded everything in front of it. Blood splashed out in the darkness. In an instant, the two of them were covered in wounds. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were completely focused, and his dark pupils became more and more terrifying. The moment the blood fell to the ground along the wound, he suddenly stopped. Li Tianlan rushed forward. This time, he didn't use ruthlessness at the summit. He didn't even have a sword in his hand. But at this moment, his whole body was full of sharp sword light. The sword light was like a tide, completely locking Jiang Shangyu. Amidst the faint sneer, Jiang Shangyu suddenly retreated. His retreat continued to accelerate. The sword light flew wantonly around him, and blood splattered. He directly withstood countless sword lights with his own body and once again got rid of Li Tianlan's blockade. The dark domain surged crazily. Within the domain, torrential rain poured down crazily. Li Tianlan frowned slightly. He couldn't find where Jiang Shanyu was at the moment. Experts who had reached this stage from the domain path were undoubtedly the most troublesome to deal with. In their own domain, they were almost omniscient and omnipotent. Their close combat abilities might be average, but if they hid in their own domain and were not discovered by others, they would be able to exhaust most of their opponents to death. The seemingly substantial darkness was constantly twisting. In the heavy rain, before Li Tianlan could perceive Jiang Shangyu's position, the innumerable darkness had condensed together and changed its shape. The boundless darkness condensed into extremely ferocious-looking machines one after another. Huge and incredibly huge barrels stretched out from the machines, one by one, two, more and more densely packed. Without any hesitation, all the barrels fired at the same time. One by one, the cannonballs condensed by the darkness suddenly flew out, covering the sky and the earth. They exploded wildly around Li Tianlan, and the world seemed to be completely overturned. The violent vibration and the strong shock wave tore Li Tianlan's body, which was extremely real. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to be really in a tragic battlefield. There were cannonballs and explosions everywhere. Although there was no smoke and fire, the power was almost the same. The cannonball fire covered the entire domain. Countless cannonballs exploded everywhere in the domain. There were more and more ferocious black turrets, and the firepower was getting more and more violent. Without any hesitation, Li Tianlan went straight forward and swept his arm. The dazzling sword light brought an arc of light up to 100 meters long in front of him. The sharp edge tore the huge turret in front of him. The dark turret disintegrated in the air, and then turned into things like armored vehicles and tanks. The cannonball fire became more and more intense, and a large number of tanks directly rolled toward Li Tianlan's face. The darkness was still surging. Silently, a huge shadow flew over from the sky. It was in the shape of a fighter plane, but the body was densely packed with cannons. Countless cannons flashed in the dark and silence, and all aimed at Li Tianlan. This was destined to be an eye-opener for everyone in the dark world, not to mention others. Even Li Tianlan had learned something new. This was the real domain. Within the domain, this was Jiang Shangyu's own world. As long as he had enough strength, as long as his will could continue to fight, everything he imagined could be completely condensed in his own domain with his own strength. It was endless. If Li Tianlan couldn't find a way to break the situation, his physical strength would be exhausted little by little, and he would eventually die here. This way of fighting might take a long time, but the possibility was real. The cannonball poured down silently. Main battle tanks, armored vehicles, fighter planes, cannons, rocket launchers, grenades, and all the modern weapons that could be imagined were materialized by martial arts in this domain of martial arts. The pressure was getting greater and greater. Li Tianlan couldn't move an inch, so he stopped. Boundless sword light surrounded him, forming a cocoon that was almost solid. The crazy cannonball fire hit the cocoon around him, causing ripples after ripples. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. A touch of impatience gradually appeared on his face. With an impatient expression, he said calmly, "You've had enough fun," so Li Tianlan's aura suddenly fell to the bottom. "It's time to end it." His light voice rang in every corner of the domain. Li Tianlan raised his palm. The aura that had fallen to the bottom began to rise as he raised his hand. Chi-controlling realm, ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm, peak of thunder-shocking realm. The aura that vaguely surpassed the peak of the invincible realm completely disappeared. At this moment, Li Tianlan's strength was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. A dazzling blue electric arc lit up on his fingertip, bringing with it sword light, sword intent, and sword energy. Li Tianlan's face turned slightly pale for a moment. Under the bombardment of countless cannonballs in the darkness, he flicked his fingers gently. Crack! Amidst the subtle sound, the blue electric arc flashed in the darkness. The next moment, the whole domain was full of blue lightning. The lightning flickered, completely twisting, exploding, and spreading in the most extreme way, covering everything with the purest destruction. The endless cannonball fire disappeared in an instant. All the cannons and weapons were crushed into powder by the extreme, twisting blue lightning. Crack! Only a faint crackling sound could be heard, with an inconceivable frequency, getting faster and faster, faster and faster. The whole domain was completely occupied by lightning. Crack! Jiang Shangyu's incredulous voice sounded. He hadn't finished his words. Everything was gone. The cannonball fire, weapons, and Li Tianlan all disappeared completely. Jiang Shangyu stood in the darkness, and his heart kept sinking. He glanced around vigilantly, and his eyes became more and more solemn. In the empty domain, Li Tianlan's voice sounded beside him. "What are you looking for?" "Divine Emperor of 9 Heavens." Chapter 983. The incomparably dense darkness completely wrapped his whole body, and he was completely integrated with the darkness. It was the darkness itself, the domain, the world, and the air. In this state, the domain was not a part of him, but he had become a part of the domain. In today's dark world, he was the only one who had broken through the peak of the invincible realm from the direction of the domain and entered a new level. Even in the story he once lived, he was the only one who had entered this level in this direction. In terms of actual combat capability, he was indeed not in his heyday now, but he knew very well how to optimize his path. What he wanted was not only a complete recovery, he wanted to completely surpass himself in his heyday. Finding Moraid was the first step, and seeing the old man whose mental strength had reached the transcendent realm in the Holy Land was the second step. Now he had done a better job in the variability and authenticity of the domain than in his heyday. Back then, Dong Chenghuangta had his own day and night. The path that Jiang Shangyu pursued was a clear illusion. So he had enough confidence to challenge Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu didn't think he could win, but he didn't think he would lose either. At least he wouldn't suffer a loss. Li Tianlan had never faced an opponent like him. So he hid in the domain and was invincible. In the first fight under normal circumstances, Jiang Shangyu was sure that Li Tianlan couldn't find him and see all his trump cards. Jiang Shangyu could carefully observe Li Tianlan's state when Li Tianlan didn't know him well enough. He had always been very confused about Li Tianlan's current state. Jiang Shangyu was very clear about his own situation. He was different from Li Tianlan. He used to be a super expert who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. His martial arts might not be perfect, but after all, the foundation of his body was still there. Even if he experienced growing up again, he had the foundation in his body, just like the master of Samsara Palace. So they could bear the power of the peak of the invincible realm, or even more powerful with their relatively young bodies. Their physical conditions had laid the foundation in the past, so they didn't need to break through, they just needed to recover. But Li Tianlan was different. He could be said to be Dongsheng Huangtu in that story, but in reality, he was Li Tianlan. Time travel, rebirth, recovery, all the words couldn't be used on him. His martial arts needed to go step by step and break through bit by bit. His physical foundation was also getting stronger little by little, but it was far from perfect. Li Tianlan was 24 years old this year. Under normal circumstances, his body could bear the power from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the half-step invincible realm at most, but what he exerted was the combat capability beyond the peak of the invincible realm. How'd he do it? Li Tianlan was like that. So was Dongxing Huangtu in the past or in the future? In that incomparably true story, Dongsheng Huangtu entered the secular world at the age of 19. The year he parted ways with the Wang family of Beihai, he was 27, but he defeated Wang Tianzong. At that time, he had not really entered the invincible realm. The year Dongsheng Huangtu died, he was 29 years old. From 27 to 29, he didn't enter the invincible realm, but he completed the final transformation. The whole world did not know Dongsheng Huangtu's secret. Even after his death, no one knew. Maybe Gu Xianyan knew at that time, but no one was sure about it. And now, this was the secret that Jiang Shanyu wanted to know the most. It was the key to him suppressing Li Tianlan, and even the key to his complete transformation to the Supreme. He urgently needed to know what was going on with Li Tianlan's current state. Then, in the seemingly not very fierce but extremely strange and dangerous battle, Jiang Shanyu saw the extremely twisted blue lightning in Li Tianlan's hand. All the secrets were hidden in that seemingly unremarkable bolt of lightning. At that moment, Jiang Shangyu's scalp went numb, and he once again felt a long-lost panic in his heart. Perhaps most people did not know what that lightning meant, but standing at Jiang Shangyu's level, he clearly perceived how terrible the nature of that lightning was. Fast. That lightning with the power of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was too fast. No matter how fast a lightning with the power of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was, it could not threaten Jiang Shangyu in the domain. But the problem was that the lightning was not fast. It was the frequency, that extremely twisted frequency. Jiang Shangyu could not determine how fast the lightning twisted, but he could be sure that within a second, the lightning in Li Tianlan's hand directly twisted thousands of times. Every time it twisted, it was almost equivalent to the full outbreak of an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. At that moment, it was equivalent to countless experts of the thunder-shocking realm attacking at the same time. The spreading lightning covered the whole domain. Every ray of light, every trace of light arc, and every glimmer of light was equivalent to an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. This was Li Tianlan's current state. His body could not bear the great pressure brought by the invincible realm, but his martial arts were perfect. The dual wind and thunder veins brought him unimaginable strength and speed, and the strong vitality of the dragon vein gave him absolute recovery. In a state of outbreak, when his aura fell to the bottom, his whole body had been completely relaxed. His strength was condensed to the limit in a second, but it was not a one-time outbreak. Li Tianlan divided his strength and sword intent into countless parts, each of which was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, layer upon layer. Every part of the power was perfectly within the range that his body could bear. The frequency of every attack, the frequency of the lightning twisting, and the speed of recovery of the body formed a perfect balance. Jiang Shangyu did not know what this meant, but he could be sure that when there were a certain number of experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, even the real chosen one could not withstand the siege of absolute numbers. How many people at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were there in the whole dark world? This realm originally represented the limit of ordinary geniuses. Every second that the seemingly weak lightning kept twisting, or even every millisecond, represented an earth-shattering power that could kill an ordinary expert of the invincible realm in seconds. And this level of full attack was not too much of a burden for Li Tianlan, which meant that as long as Li Tianlan wanted to do it, he could maintain this terrifying and unimaginable state. This time might be very short, 30 seconds, 1 minute, but combined with the twisting frequency of the lightning, it was too long to maintain this state for a second. What if Li Tianlan was willing to pay a certain price? Could he raise the power of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the half-step invincible realm, or even to the invincible realm? In that state, Li Tianlan would definitely be seriously injured, but everything in front of him would be completely torn apart. What would it be like when this high-frequency, twisting power reached the peak of the invincible realm? Jiang Shangyu's heart suddenly turned cold. Unparalleled fear occupied all his consciousness in an instant. He did not dare to imagine that picture at all. Now Li Tianlan could twist the lightning thousands of times in a second without getting hurt. As his physical fitness continued to improve, how terrifying would it be when he could twist the sword intent of the peak of the invincible realm thousands of times in a second? Thousands of experts at the peak of the invincible realm would attack at the same time. That was the power that could completely challenge the whole world. Jiang Shangyu could be sure that even Dongsheng Huangtu had not reached this level at his peak. Did this mean that Li Tianlan was very close to Dongsheng Huangtu? Countless images and speculations kept flashing in his mind. Invincible. For the first time, Jiang Shangyu had a very clear understanding of this word. There was no sound in the dark domain. Jiang Shangyu's eyes became more and more cautious, slowly scanning everything in the domain. The lightning caused severe damage to the entire domain. Everything in the domain disappeared, and the domain itself was fragmented. Countless darkness slowly surged along Jiang Shangyu's body. Jiang Shangyu's aura became a little weaker, and the domain gradually formed a hole again. Haven't you found it yet? Li Tianlan's voice sounded again. It seemed to be far away, but also seemed to be close at hand. Jiang Shangyu's heart kept sinking, and his body was stretched to the limit. What are you looking for? Haven't you found it yet? The corner of his mouth twitched, and he laughed at himself in his heart. He even wanted to laugh. Everything in front of him seemed to be a joke. He was omniscient and omnipotent in his own domain, but in his own domain, he couldn't find his opponent. Li Tianlan must be in the domain, but Jiang Shangyu couldn't find him. What was this? Why was it like this? How'd he do it? This was even more of a blow to his confidence than when Jiang Shangyu found out Li Tianlan's true state. After all, the extremely twisted sword light was at the level of swordsmanship. Jiang Shangyu never thought that the domain must be worse than swordsmanship. Li Tianlan's swordsmanship could reach that level, and he believed that the domain could too, but he hadn't found the way to that level yet. But now Li Tianlan was in the domain, but he was out of his perception. The psychological impact on Jiang Shangyu was completely different from before. This was equivalent to Li Tianlan suppressing Jiang Shangyu's advantage in what he was best at. How is this possible? Crackle, crackle. The faint sound of the electric current was still ringing in the domain, and the extremely huge destructive power would not dissipate for a while. The pain spread from every part of his body to his brain. Because of the absolute tension, Jiang Shangyu's body affected the wound, and his shirt had been completely dyed red with blood. Crackle. In the faint sound, he stared at the faint electric light in front of him, which seemed to dissipate at any time. Here, without warning, a palm appeared on Jiang Shangyu's shoulder. A huge force came down from above and pressed Jiang Shangyu's body down in an instant. The moment Jiang Shangyu, whose face changed dramatically, knelt on one knee, a domineering and fierce leg swept toward his head. The dragon's roar echoed fiercely right beside his ears. Without any room to react, Jiang Shangyu held his head with both hands and rolled to the side in a very embarrassing posture on the ground. The darkness surged, and Jiang Shangyu was 20 meters away in an instant. He turned around and stared in the direction of the attack just now. The darkness there was quiet and stable, and there was nothing strange. Where is he? Jiang Shangyu's eyes narrowed tightly. The dark domain covered the entire Emperor Dong's palace. He could almost see every corner and every detail in the domain. He could even see the ants carrying some breadcrumbs 400 or 500 meters away. But he just couldn't see Li Tianlan. His figure spun quickly in his domain, in all directions. No Li Tianlan. Two arms stretched out silently from behind him and instantly wrapped around his neck. Jiang Shangyu, whose aura was fluctuating violently, did not hesitate and burst out all the power in his body in an instant. In an instant, there seemed to be a black sun rising in the domain. The black sunlight was completely boiling, evaporating everything in the domain. Jiang Shangyu gasped rapidly, and his heart became more and more flustered. The moment the arms wrapped around his neck, he fought back completely out of instinct. When the black sunlight swept everything around, Jiang Shangyu could clearly feel the arms wrapped around his neck, but he could only feel the other party's arms. At that time, there was no one behind him. This was not an illusion. There was really no one. Jiang Shangyu didn't know what was going on at all. The domain that he was proud of was completely used by Li Tianlan. In his omnipotent domain, he could see through everything. But when it came to Li Tianlan, he was like a blind man. The light suddenly lit up in the darkness for a moment. The dazzling sword light appeared directly in front of Jiang Shangyu, without any warning. The sound of clothes being torn and blood flying at the same time. The sword light shredded his shirt and left a long gash on his chest. Jiang Shangyu's face was livid. It wasn't an expression of extreme anger. Instead, it was more like an expression of extreme shock. Traces of black light surged from afar. It gradually covered his whole body from head to toe. Jiang Shangyu's body seemed to be covered with a layer of black gauze. Bang! The sound of the crazy vibration of the joints was like a dragon's roar. A fist that seemed to be able to penetrate everything also appeared on his back without any warning. There was no sound of the wind when the fist was waved, only the majestic and incredible power. It seemed to be a sudden burst of strength at a close distance. The hard knuckles smashed on Jiang Shangyu's back. There was a loud noise in his whole body, as if his internal organs were crazy. Vibration. The gauze composed of black silk threads suddenly twisted and offset most of the power. But Jiang Shangyu's figure flew out nearly 20 meters under this punch, and a mouthful of warm blood sprayed directly from his mouth. Before the blood fell to the ground, the sword light appeared from behind again and slashed at his neck. There was no time to straighten up. Jiang Shangyu rolled on the ground desperately. His breathing became more and more rapid, his face gradually pale, and the surrounding domain began to become unstable. You look like a wild dog that has been beaten and can't fight back. In the silent darkness, Li Tianlan's voice rang in his ear. The corner of Jiang Shangyu's mouth twitched. He gritted his teeth and said word by word, "I am a human." "Oh," Li Tianlan said faintly. Jiang Shangyu turned his body and looked around. He was silent for a long time before he gritted his teeth and asked, "Where the hell are you?" This was definitely not a question that he should ask, but he asked it. This was definitely not a question that Li Tianlan would answer. But Li Tianlan also gave the answer. "Look back," he said. Chapter 984. Looking back, Jiang Shangyu didn't look back. The moment he heard Li Tianlan's voice, he rushed straight ahead. There was no attack behind him. The dark domain that enveloped the entire Emperor Dong's palace was churning and shrinking wildly. The starlight and the night reappeared. The huge domain shrank to 100 meters in less than a breath, and then shrank again. 50 meters, 30 meters, 15 meters. Li Tianlan inexplicably felt a trace of familiarity. Everyone who saw this scene felt that it was very familiar, but also very strange. The domain, which had shrunk to 15 meters, had become completely substantial. The darkness formed the strongest wall, and countless glimmers flickered on the dark wall. Jiang Shangyu stood in the center of the dark wall with an indestructible momentum. This was the unique skill of the Jiang family of South America. 30-meter mortal world. Before Jiang Shangyu appeared, it was known as the strongest domain in the dark world, and its defense was the best in the world. But this was also Jiang Shangyu's unique skill. The limit of 30-meter mortal world was only 30 meters. It was known that there was nothing to fear within 30 meters, but Jiang Shangyu exceeded the limit and shrank the domain by half again. When the domain was condensed to this extent, the defense was not simply doubled. The dark wall was completely condensed. Standing in the darkness, Jiang Shangyu appeared in front of all the spectators for the first time. In countless corners of Emperor Dong's palace, the representatives of different forces were watching this scene quietly. When the domain spread to the entire Emperor Dong's palace, they could only see darkness and the occasional sword light in the darkness. At this moment, it could be said that Jiang Shangyu appeared in people's sight for the first time. It's going to end. In the office on the 5th floor of Emperor Dong's palace, Saint Li Shi and Situ Sangyue, the 3 deputy palace masters, stood side by side and watched Jiang Shangyu appear from the darkness. Saint said lightly. Li Shi did not speak. Situ Sangyue nodded and said yes. The most tricky thing about Jiang Shangyu was his domain. For the time being, no one had a deep understanding of the domain beyond the peak of the invincible realm, which was also the biggest variable. But at this time, Jiang Shangyu completely shrank the domain, which meant that he gave up his biggest advantage and became defensive. He defended in front of Li Tianlan. This was a complete joke. In the center of the dark wall, Jiang Shangyu's body had been tense to the limit. He couldn't find Li Tianlan, nor would he believe Li Tianlan's nonsense. The only thing he could do was to shrink his domain to the extreme. Within a range of 15 meters, there was no space for Li Tianlan to hide at all, and the extremely condensed domain was not something that Li Tianlan could break at will. He had tested out Li Tianlan's true state, and the purpose of the challenge had been achieved. At this point, he could already retreat to Beihai. Countless eyes were focused on Jiang Shangyu. It was quiet inside and outside the domain. In front of him was an extremely solid wall, and outside the wall was the night sky and starry sky of Emperor Dong's palace. There was no Li Tianlan. A drop of cold sweat flowed down Jiang Shangyu's forehead, and there was only astonishment left in his heart. How could there be none? What is he hiding? Where is it? Jiang Shangyu cautiously moved his body. Everything was normal inside and outside the domain. He was the only one there, but he was sure that Li Tianlan was nearby, somewhere he couldn't see. Since he couldn't see Li Tianlan, he naturally didn't dare to retreat. Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. The tall wall surrounding him stood before him, solid, deep, and heavy. That was his ultimate defense in his current state. Li Tianlan might be able to break the domain by force, but he definitely couldn't do it in a short time. His expression calmed down little by little. He was safe in the domain. Li Tianlan couldn't break his domain, which meant that he could force his way out of Emperor Dong's palace. Just like Li Tianlan couldn't see through his domain before, so he chose not to look at it. He couldn't find Li Tianlan's position now, so he wouldn't look for it. Without any hesitation, the domain, which had shrunk to a range of 15 meters, shook violently. Jiang Shangyu's body rose into the air and was about to rush into the distance. He didn't care about the so-called face. He didn't have much expectation for this challenge. Now that he had confirmed Li Tianlan's current state, it was a worthwhile trip. Tonight, the dark world might laugh at him, but after dawn, everyone would shut up. His feet left the ground, and the domain was shaking. His speed instantly increased to the limit. Sprint! Jiang Shangyu's body had already risen into the air, but he didn't rush out. He felt a sharp pain in his scalp. The moment his feet left the ground, a hand directly reached out from behind him and grabbed his hair. Because the speed was too fast, this grab almost scratched off his scalp. Jiang Shangyu gave a muffled groan and didn't react for a while. Why don't you look back? In a faint voice, the attacks fell like a storm in an instant. The whole Emperor Dong's palace fell into a dead silence the moment Li Tianlan's voice sounded. The Heroes Club, the men in black, the Shadow Throne, all the representatives of the forces stared at the scene in front of them, as if they were completely petrified. All the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace looked incredulous, as if they had seen a ghost. Jiang Shangyu didn't see anything. He was only suffering attacks, continuous attacks. But his figure appeared in everyone's sight, so everyone saw Jiang Shangyu and Li Tianlan. This, in a luxurious bedroom, Horsewoman stood beside Qin Weibai with a puzzled look. She subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai and asked, "How did he do it?" "I don't know," Qin Weibai said quickly. She frowned tightly and stared at Jiang Shangyu, who was being attacked crazily. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a touch of confusion and worry. She didn't know what Li Tianlan's state meant. At least in the stories she had read and heard, Dongqing Huangtu didn't seem to have this kind of martial arts. Everything seemed to have changed at this moment. Li Tianlan, Dongqing Huangtu. Different times. The parallel lines that were parallel to each other and finally intersected seemed to fly in different directions again after a short intersection. Why is this happening? Qin Weibai murmured to herself and shook her head hard. Is this still martial arts? Saint stared at the battlefield. The battlefield was getting farther and farther away. Jiang Shangyu wanted to run. The moment Li Tianlan's attack broke out, the two moved crazily. The domain within 15 meters. Li Tianlan had been in the domain all the time. Li Tianlan couldn't break this domain in a short time. And Jiang Shangyu, who was in an extreme defensive posture, couldn't cancel this domain in a short time. The area of 15 meters had become a domain where death and danger coexisted. The unique skill that once belonged to the Li family broke out without reservation. In close combat, Li Tianlan was not afraid of anyone at all. Jiang Shangyu didn't even have a chance to look back. He could only hide. Without looking back, he just ran forward crazily. He ran out of Emperor Dong's palace and rushed into the old city area of Xianyuan City, which was being renovated. The two figures gradually disappeared from sight. Saint suddenly turned back, looked at Situ Sangyue, and said seriously, "What is this?" She was also looking at Situ Sangyue. In their minds, in the whole dark world, apart from Li Tianlan, it seemed that only Situ Sangyue could answer this question. "I don't know." Situ Sangyue recalled the scenes just now. Li Tianlan was in the domain. But when Jiang Shangyu appeared, not only Jiang Shangyu, but also all of them didn't see Li Tianlan in the space of 15 meters. Situ Tsue smiled bitterly and whispered, "I think apart from Tianlan, only my brother can answer this question." Boom! A loud noise suddenly came from the distant night. An abandoned low-rise building waiting to be demolished completely collapsed under the huge force. Smoke and dust flew all over the sky. Jiang Shangyu's body fell from the ruins with the broken building at the same time. Puff! Blood spurted out of his mouth. He knelt on one knee on the ground and coughed violently. "Why don't you look back?" Li Tianlan asked again. The voice was right in his ear. Jiang Shangyu suddenly turned back. The domain was still there, but there was nothing behind him. Jiang Shangyu felt cold all over. There was nothing behind him, except for his shadow. The distant starlight and light converged, outlining his shadow on the ground. The shadow was very faint. Jiang Shangyu knelt on the ground and lowered his head. His shadow was standing, maintaining a posture of waving a fist. Jiang Shangyu looked confused. He hesitated and said in a hoarse voice, "What is this? How did you do it?" Li Tianlan's voice came from his shadow. His voice was also confused. "I don't know. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.